Post-Apocalyptic Black Technology Battleship System. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 351 Situation. Chapter 355 Situation. Xia Bai ate an apple for about 10 minutes. This was the longest time it took him to eat apples in his life, but he didn't feel it was a long time or a waste of time. There was silence in the small ward. Bailan handed pieces of apples to Xia Bai's mouth. It was so simple and clear, but also inexplicably shocking. Xia Bai only felt unprecedented peace. After the conversation about apples and women, neither of them said anything else. They didn't mention the previous war or the current situation. It was as if this tranquility was enough. But such time is short-lived after all. It is now the 5th year of the apocalypse. Alien creatures have just attacked the ice city, and Xia Bai's battleship has just fallen from the sky. All of this is destined to not be peaceful for a long time. After finishing an apple, Bailan slowly put down the fruit knife in his hand and looked at Xia Bai. The slight smile that had been in his eyes was finally replaced by a serious expression at this moment. Xia Bai, Shinzen, die. Xia Bai said, I know. At the end of that battle, he saw with his own eyes that Shinzen's White Pigeon battleship intercepted the manta ray aircraft. The White Pigeon fighter plane exploded in the sky, and no escape capsule flew out. Bailan glanced at him and said, now we are in the temporary camp in Heching, the old people's hospital, and our ship is still parked in Shenzhen. Xia Bai knew clearly that Bailan saying still parked in Shanghai was a good statement. His warship was not parked in Shanghai, but crashed in Shanghai. Moreover, without Bailan's explanation, Xia Bai was actually able to know the situation of his battleship. Although he does not have any equipment now, cannot connect to Alpha, and does not know whether Alpha has been restored and activated, Xia Bai's system is still there, and he can understand the current status of his battleship more intuitively through the system. The system information is always the most intuitive. Dear Captain, your battleship has been damaged to 94%. It is severely damaged and needs urgent repair. It is estimated that the energy points required for repair are 950,000 points. These are really a bunch of terrible numbers. Xia Bai remembered that from the day he got the battleship to now, the battleship seemed to have never been damaged to the point of 94%. The battleship became stronger, but was knocked down from the sky. Xia Bai couldn't help but laugh bitterly. He looked at himself and said, what's going on with me, Bai? Lang glanced at Xia Bai and said, you have the nerve to ask what happened to you. You were thrown out of your own position. Your place was high and open, and you fell down. Xia Bai couldn't help but twitch his lips when he heard this. At this moment, he was thinking about the safety measures that Alpha had to remind him every time he sat on the captain's seat. This time, when he went back, he didn't want Alpha to criticize him. Xia Bai frowned slightly and said, what time is it now? May 13th. Bailan said, the doctor said you had a slight concussion. Xia Bai nodded and said, where is that ship? Where is the alien battleship? We beat him down. Xia Bai couldn't help but take a deep breath. Although he had known and thought of this answer for a long time, now that he heard Bailan say it so calmly, Xia Bai still felt a little unspeakably excited. No matter what, although the battleship suffered huge losses, they still won and knocked the battleship out of the sky. Xia Bai exhaled and sat up from the bed. This shocked Bailan and said, what are you doing? The doctor said that you have a slight concussion and you must. At this moment, Xia Bai reached out and patted Bailan on the shoulder. This move made Bailan slightly stunned, and the second half of the sentence was blocked in his mouth and did not come out. Xia Bai said, I know, but we have to hurry up and get our battleship flying again, don't we, Bai? Lang couldn't help being slightly stunned. But Xia Bai had already pulled out all kinds of things from his body, stood up from the hospital bed, and walked out the door, while Bailan was still stunned. Xia Bai had already walked out of the door. To Xia Bai's surprise, when he opened the door, he saw two strong men standing guard outside. Xia Bai knew one of these two people, Hao Zuan. This guy was as strong as a mountain. When he stood there, he looked like a door god guarding a house in ancient times. But standing on the other side was a guy dressed as a guard who was unfamiliar to Xia Bai. He also stood upright. The two people stood here like two wooden piles, with their backs straight and their eyes fixed. When Xia Bai came out and saw these two guys, he was startled by each other. When Xia Bai opened the door and walked out, the two of them were even more surprised. Hao Zhuang said directly, "Damn it, boss, you're awake." As he said this, the guy looked inside the house, not knowing what he was looking at. Xia Bai twitched the corner of his mouth and said, "This is a hospital. What are you doing with such a loud voice? And what are you doing? Why didn't you go in instead of running outside and standing outside?" When Hao Zhuang heard this, he smiled and said, "I'm not holding the door for you." Xia Bai was speechless for a while and said, "What kind of era is this? There are still door guards, so you should go inside and take a look." Hao Zhuang's expression straightened slightly when he heard this and said, "Big brother, you are wrong to say that. Look, Sister Bailan is looking at you inside. If I go in, hey, what do you think this is? What's going on, right?" Xia Bai couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth and said, "You should speak politely. Why do you always show such vulgarity?" Hao Zhuang rubbed his hands and smiled. "Aren't I happy? Boss, you are finally awake. There are a lot of people here waiting for you to give orders." Xia Bai also smiled. He saw Bailan as soon as he woke up, and Hao Zhuang when he went out. He felt warm in his heart and was even more moved. Only then did Xia Bai look at the guard on the other side. There were more than 200 people on Xia Bai's battleship, but he was sure that this guard was definitely not from his battleship. However, when the other party saw Xia Bai coming out alive, he seemed as excited as Hao Zhuang, like a groupie who saw the star he was chasing. He rubbed his hands and looked excited, but didn't know what to say. Xia Bai couldn't help but turn his inquiring eyes to Hao Zhuang. But at this moment, another slightly gloomy female voice came from inside the room. "I heard someone calling me eldest sister just now. Is it the finale? Is it the finale?" Chapter 350 To the Dying Man. Chapter 356 The Dying Man. No matter what time, Bailan's controlling power is still very strong. As she walked out, Hao Zhuang became completely honest, and the obscene look on his face disappeared. He said directly, "In this case, I will go and gather our people." With that said, the guy ran away in a hurry. On the other side, the guard stood directly in front of Xia Bai, performed a very standard military salute, and said, "Hello, Mr. Xia, I'm Zhao Jiangong, the guard squad leader of Commander Xiang, and I have been ordered to ensure your safety." Xia Bai was slightly stunned when he heard this, and smiled. "It seems that my treatment is not bad. It is thanks to Liao Yang and the others that they are very proud. Now there are specialists to ensure my safety." Bai Lan stood behind Xia Bai, curling her lips silently and saying nothing. Although Xia Bai was diagnosed with a mild concussion, Xia Bai recovered well, and he felt almost nothing this time. He is now in a hospital in a county town below Hechen. This is one of the peripheral construction areas opened by Shanghai City. It was originally the forward base for Shanghai City's large-scale expansion in the future. However, with this time of the Shanghai War, it has become a temporary settlement. Xia Bai originally wanted to meet the members of his battleship first. After a big battle, the battleship collapsed, and the people suffered heavy casualties. Then Xia Bai would really be at a loss. But before the final blow, unrelated personnel had already started the evacuation process. The escape cabins in the battleship were all space grade. Unless they were particularly unlucky, the majority of survivors in the battleship should be the majority. Moreover, Xia Bai remembered that at the end of the battleship's fall, he saw that his energy points seemed to increase crazily, but how much he had to return to the battleship could only be confirmed. However, Xia Bai was not able to rendezvous with the members of his fleet as soon as he wished. After Zhao Jiangong, the guard squad leader, expressed his excitement to Xia Bai. He reported the news directly to his superiors and then passed down a new order. "Li Guangji, Secretary Li wants to see you." Li Guangji. Xia Bai's head was still a little confused. He was stunned for a second before he realized that Li Guangji, the leader of the entire Shenzhen war zone, whom he had met in the underground command center of Yaodan building before. That shaky old man. Xia Bai nodded slightly to Bailan, and then went downstairs under the guidance of Zhao Jiangan. This hospital has recovered well, and there is no trace of the apocalypse anymore. It originally existed as a military hospital in the outer area of Shenzhen, but with the paralysis of Shenzhen's system, it has become very important, especially now. This is the closest and safest medical facility to Shanghai. Therefore, it is not surprising that Li Guangji is here. Compared with Xia Bai, Li's room was much larger than Xia Bai's, but his condition was worse than when Xia Bai last saw him. His face was pale, and his already pale hair became even thinner. He was connected to various devices, and it seemed that he had deliberately raised the angle of the bed because he wanted to see Xia Bai. But his eyes were as sharp as the first day Xia Bai saw him. No matter how weak his body looked, there was no color in his eyes that a dying person should have. Xia Bai thought to himself that this might be the attitude of a person who can truly control a situation. When Xia Bai came in, Zhao Jiangang stood outside the door naturally and acted as a guard. There was a little nurse in the room who was quite cute. Seeing this, she lowered her head and planned to leave in a hurry. But at this time, Li Guangji stopped her and said, "You can stay here. I think although mister there is no good medical judgment, so you can stay." The nurse was stunned for a moment, showing a bit of hesitation. She is very smart and knows who Li Guangji and Xia Bai are, and she also knows that people of her level must not listen to the conversations of these people. Li Guangji smiled and said, "We don't want to say anything shameful. Besides, yesterday you said you wanted to meet this Captain Xia." The nurse took back her steps, took 2 steps back, and stood in the corner with her hands down. Li Guangji glanced at Xia Bai and said, "Look, I don't know where this concept came from. When big people speak, small people can't listen." Xia Bai smiled, did not answer this sentence, pulled a stool aside, and sat down on Li Guangji's bedside. He was not in a good condition, and he felt slightly dizzy. After standing for a long time. He glanced at Li Guangji and said, "Secretary Li, what are you? Tumor?" Li Guangji looked very calm when he said this word, as if he was talking about someone else's disease. It's late, there is no way to save it, and the medical conditions are not enough, so he is about to die. According to common sense, the physical condition of people at Li Guangji's level is monitored in real time. If there is any illness, it should be discovered as soon as possible. But these 5 years and the last days. Xia Bai looked at him, thought for a while, and said, "How much longer?" "Don't worry, I won't die that soon." Li Guangji said, "The doctor said I still have at least 2 months. The premise is that you cooperate with the treatment." At this time, the little nurse in the corner couldn't help but interject. But she soon realized that she was rash and quickly lowered her head and shrank into the corner. In her eyes, Xia Bai and Li Guangji in front of her were like wild beasts, as if they might eat her at any time. Xia Bai said, "I was in Shanghai 2 days ago. Does that count as non-cooperation?" Li Guangji shook his head, nodded again, and said, "I'm the #1 chief of the Shenzhen area first, and then I'm Li Guangji." What he said was a bit obscure, but Xia Bai understood it immediately and fell silent. Li Guangji smiled and said, "Don't think that I'm a person of great enlightenment. The fact is exactly the opposite. I'm about to die, so I look very impressive. Furthermore, I know that many people in Shenzhen have other ideas and have misunderstandings with you, but what I want to say is that people are like this, greedy and insufficient, and no one is exempt, so I made this decision. These ridiculous things are nothing, but if one day, like the day in Shanghai, alien creatures really fly over in a ship, those people will still be on your side. Everyone can figure out the big things right and wrong, but small thoughts can cause big troubles, right?" Chapter 353 I will protect you from death. Chapter 357 I will protect you from death. Xia Bai smiled and said, "Are you giving me a vaccination?" Li Guangji said, "It seems that my vaccination is not very good." He coughed as he spoke, and the nurse in the corner wanted to come up, but hesitated slightly and still didn't move. After coughing for a while, Li Guangji's breath calmed down again. He looked at Xia Bai and said, I just want to say that no matter what time, we are all human beings, and we should stand on the same front, but along the way, everything may not go as smoothly as any of us imagine. We humans are the most united group, but at the same time, we are also the most changeable and untrustworthy. People who think that humans will hold hands and unite when disaster strikes are fools, but humans will eventually unite. In this battle in Shenzhen, your battleship fell. I promise you here that within 2 months, I will devote all the resources of the Shenzhen theater to help you and repair your battleship as much as possible. Moreover, I'm willing all information resources in the entire Shenzhen war zone are open to you, and you can access them at will. Xia Bai noticed that all the promises made by this person had a prerequisite, which was 2 months. Li Guangji said he could live for at most 2 months. He can suppress the entire Shanghai situation in 1 day. Xia Bai knew that it was probably Li Guangji's credit that he could wake up from the hospital ward so smoothly. During the Shenzhen war, mankind was united as never before. The military cooperated with Xia Bai, and Xia Bai cooperated with the military. Countless Shenzhen survivors were evacuated in batches, but the situation is different now. Some people say that the end of the world is coming. How can humans still fight among themselves? There must be unprecedented unity to resist the apocalypse. Some people say that when the apocalypse comes, civilization will collapse, and everyone will become a cold-blooded madman who is neither human nor ghost. But isn't such an extreme idea incredible? There are not all selfless people in this world, nor are they all selfish people. The vast majority of people are somewhere in between. There are not many truly smart people in this world, and there are not many truly stupid people. There are more mediocre people in between. Sometimes the decisions they make and the achievements they make can surprise others, but sometimes they make extremely stupid mistakes. People who stand from the perspective of I'm always right are always the real losers. Therefore, absolutely smart people often cannot be omnipotent people, and absolutely selfish people cannot be successful in a certain field. This is what Li Guangji wants to say. He is reminding Xia Bai that there will be trouble, but more importantly, he hopes that Xia Bai can act cautiously. Xia Bai understood why Li Guangji said this. This may be because of the extreme arrogance Xia Bai showed when he scared Secretary Wu. For people like Li Guangji, just one thing can roughly tell what kind of person a person is. He realized that Xia Bai was the kind of guy who would retaliate against others, so he was worried that Xia Bai would have a conflict with some people in Shen City. He was worried about Xia Bai and the people in Shenzhen. As he said before, he is the person in charge of the Shenzhen war zone, and everything about him must be considered from the starting point. Xia Bai understood Li Guangji's thoughts, but he could not make any promises, because Xia Bai's idea has always been very simple. I don't cause trouble myself. You can try to mess with me, but don't mess with me. If you mess with me, the matter won't be solved easily. This is especially true now. Xia Bai is the captain of a battleship and the leader of hundreds of people. Just like during the previous battle in Shenzhen, Xia Bai has to be responsible for everyone's life and death, and he must also ensure his own safety. Xia Bai would never allow everyone's interests in the battleship to be bullied by others or bullied by his people. Xia Bai glanced at Li Guangji, remained silent for a moment, and said, I understand what you mean, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness, but you won't die in 2 months. Li Guangji was slightly stunned, and for a moment he didn't understand what Xia Bai meant by these words. Xia Bai looked at the man in front of him and said solemnly, my battleship will take off again, and I do need help from the military, but equally, I need more than just 2 months of help, and you won't be here either. He died 2 months later. The current medical conditions may not be good, and there may not be any method or drug on Earth that can kill cancer cells, but I can, and my battleship can. I will ensure your survival when my battleship is repaired. When the time comes, you will ensure that my cooperation with the military will not cause any problems or rifts. Li Guangji looked at Xia Bai in front of him and couldn't help but froze slightly after hearing such words. But in the corner, the female nurse who had always looked timid showed a surprised look. The first moment Xia Bai said that he could kill Li Guangji, the little nurse's first reaction was that it was impossible, but then she realized that the other person was the captain of a huge battleship, and just 2 days later, she realized that he could kill Li Guangji. Previously, the opponent had just shot down the alien warship thunderously over Shenzhen. So, it does not seem surprising that Xia Bai, who has such technology and ability, can say such things. Having such ability does not seem surprising. However, such technology, the nurse took a silent breath, thought about it, and then stepped back. Xia Bai's words were not a boast. The 6th level battleship already had nano level medical facilities. As long as energy points were invested, it would not be a problem to kill Li Guangji. Li Guangji fell silent. He looked at Xia Bai silently. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Then I will wait for that day." Xia Bai smiled and said, "But now, I want to go back to my battleship, and I hope you can help me make arrangements." Returning to the battleship as soon as possible and then repairing the battleship is the top priority point at the moment. Li Guangji specially called Xia Bai here. After saying so much, it was just that someone wanted to make things difficult for Xia Bai, and Xia Bai now had only one thing in his hand that could make things difficult for him, a battleship point. In other words, someone wants to get Xia Bai's battleship point. Then, Xia Bai's goal of returning to the battleship as soon as possible may not be so easy to achieve. Therefore, Xia Bai directly took this opportunity to let Li Guangji give him a push, which could directly avoid entanglements with those unimportant people. Li Guangji glanced at him and said, "Don't worry, I will make arrangements. You can return to your battleship in 2 hours at the latest." Chapter 354 Your level is not enough. Chapter 358 Your level is not enough. Li Guangji made a promise. He looked at Xia Bai in front of him and said slowly, "Xia Bai, that might just be a scientific research ship or a gunboat. We destroyed it, but it doesn't mean we won." Xia Bai said, "I understand." Li Guangji smiled, leaned his head back on the pillow, and said no more. Xia Bai nodded at him, then turned around and walked out. Li Guangji's condition is not good, and now he needs to stay quiet and be in an absolute state of rest. Xia Bai wants to use the battleship's medical methods to cure this person, but it is not something that can be done now. The battleship was seriously damaged. If Xia Bai remembered correctly, the battleship's medical cabin had been torn to pieces by the bombardment of the Glacier battleship at that time. Don't think about this until the battleship recovered. Of course Xia Bai also knew what Li Guangji said. That Glacier battleship in no way represents an alien civilization. Moreover, that may not be the full armed force of the other party. Now that Xia Bai destroyed it, it only achieved temporary peace. It did not mean the victory of the war, nor did it mean that the Earth was safe. On the contrary, it could mean a greater threat. Because they have already appeared and even crashed on the Earth. More enemy ships are likely to arrive at any time. Maybe tomorrow, a more powerful and terrifying enemy warship may have appeared in the outer orbit of the Earth. Of course, it may also be another 5 years before the opponent appears in the sky of the Earth again. But no matter what, Xia Bai's top priority now is to upgrade his warships faster. This time it was more urgent than before, because even he didn't know when enemy warships would once again press against the sky of the Earth. Moreover, before that, Xia Bai must first deal with the global atmosphere modification system on the Earth. Xia Bai still clearly remembers what Yu Yun and Xia Bai said before. If the situation continues to develop, all the people on Earth will die before the alien warships come to kill them again. In Xia Bai's view, Li Guangji's worries were unnecessary. Xia Bai had no intention of interacting with anyone in Shenzhen. When the battleship was repaired, Xia Bai would start shutting down the global atmosphere modification system. Xia Bai left Li Guangji's ward and found that many people were standing outside at some point. They were all people whom Xia Bai didn't know. Some were in military uniforms and some in formal clothes. It was a mess. Xia Bai took a glance and saw that there were 7 of them, not counting Zhao Jiangang. When they saw Xia Bai coming out, they all involuntarily leaned forward slightly, wanting to speak. Each of these people has a commercial purpose on their face, and everyone can see that they all have their own purpose when they appear here at this moment. Xia Bai glanced at this group of people and said before they could speak, "Are there any of you at the level of leaderly in the ward?" This group of people were slightly stunned when they heard this. They didn't know where Xia Bai's question came from, but obviously, Li Guangji is the leader of the entire Shencheng war zone at the moment, and these people are all the kind of people who pass the news. How could he be on the same level as Li Guangji? Xia Bai smiled slightly and said, "Are there any of you who are on the same level as Chief Xiang?" Everyone was silent again. Zhao Jiangang, the guard squad leader by the side, was stunned for a moment. He misunderstood Xia Bai's meaning, took a slight step forward and said, "Well, Mr. Xia, you may not know them. Let me introduce them to you." Xia Bai waved his hand at Zhao Jiangang, thinking that this guy was quite enthusiastic, so he continued to look at the miscellaneous fish in front of him, and said, "Are you ordinary survivors?" The group of people fell silent again. None of them, including Zhao Jiangang, knew what Xia Bai wanted to ask with these three questions. Xia Bai then smiled and said, "Since you are not at the level of Li Li, nor at the level of Chief Xiang, nor are you ordinary survivors, then you can go back home. I'm Xia Bai, the captain of the any ancient battleship. Your level is not high enough. I don't want to get to know you." After saying this, Xia Bai turned around and walked to the other side of the corridor. The group of people behind were all stunned on the spot. Even Zhao Jiangang's expression was a little stiff. He was an upright guy. When Xia Bai said this, he was a little embarrassed to follow Xia Bai. But Xia Bai took 2 steps forward and saw that Zhao Jiangang didn't follow. He paused slightly, turned around and said with a smile, "Squad leader Zhao, don't be stunned. I'm not familiar with this place, and I'm still waiting for you to lead me." Zhao Jiangang was stunned again, then quickly took steps to catch up. It is not difficult to find Hao Zhuang and the others. This is a hospital, and it is a war in Shencheng. The hospital is full of injured patients. If Hao Zhuang wants to gather everyone, he can only gather them outside the hospital. Therefore, when Xia Bai stood upstairs and looked down, he could see a group of 50 or 60 people standing in the front yard of the hospital, all wearing fleet battle uniforms. Xia Bai took a look at it and felt quite emotional. Before the battle in Shencheng, he did not dare to say that his battleship was monolithic. But now, after the battle in Shencheng, his battleship was destroyed. I don't know how many members of the fleet survived, but the cohesion of the battleship, but there is sometimes it's like this. A bloody battle can sometimes bring people in a team closer together than years of running in. Xia Bai smiled and walked down. The fleet members gathered below attracted the attention of quite a few people. Outside, a larger circle of people had formed early. There were on-site security personnel, as well as various medical staff and patients, all standing on the periphery of this group of people, pointing like a crowd. Xia Bai's appearance caused quite a stir. Hao Zhuang was the first to see Xia Bai, and shouted from a distance, and the crew members immediately cheered up. After such a battle, as a group, they knocked down the huge glacier battleship from the sky. The excitement and pride were indescribable. And the person they most wanted to express their excitement and pride to was undoubtedly the captain, Xia Bai. This was unexpected by Xia Bai. This may be the first time he has faced such cheers since he became the captain of a battleship and recruited this group of people. As he walked out of the corridor, people along the way took the initiative to make way for him. Amidst the cheers of the fleet members, everyone looked at Xia Bai. At this time, Xia Bai realized that he was more famous than he thought. Chapter 355 Attention. Chapter 359 Attention. But Xia Bai soon discovered that he was famous, but he didn't seem to be a national hero as he imagined. The expressions in people's eyes when they looked at him were more of awe. At that time, there was a big battle in Shencheng. Xia Bai's warship entered along the Pujiang River, fought to the death with the glacier warship in the sky, and finally fell, which was imprinted in the eyes of everyone in Shencheng. The scene of that giant ship passing through the sky will forever be imprinted in the hearts of everyone in Shencheng. The members of the fleet were very excited, but others were silent. The courtyard in front of the hospital was packed with people, and the man was standing behind every window in the back building. People on the ground and upstairs were all looking at Xia Bai. Xia Bai walked forward, and people took the initiative to separate. He was silent, and so were the people. Gradually, the crew members also fell silent. At this time, the people who had stopped Xia Bai outside Li Guangji's ward also ran out at this time. They wanted to catch up with Xia Bai and work hard again. Although he was given nice words by Xia Bai, They were speechless, but they all had their own goals and wanted to get what they wanted from Xia Bai. How could they give up? But when they rushed out of the corridor and saw such a scene and such silence, they themselves froze on the spot. Standing at the door, they were as motionless as wooden stakes. Xia Bai walked forward step by step and walked into the middle of the crew. Zhao Jiangang thought for a while and stopped outside. Xia Bai felt that he wanted to say something, but to be honest, although his face was calm, he didn't know what to say in his heart. With so many people looking at him and waiting for him to say something, Xia Bai was a little confused. Why are these people so strange? Now that the battle is over, what else can I say? He glanced at Bailan standing beside him and asked with his eyes, what should I say? What should I say in this situation? But in Xia Bai's opinion, Bailan also seemed a little strange at the moment. Xia Bai could at least understand other people's eyes, such as those ordinary guards and the pride and expectations of his own crew members. These were all very simple and clear emotions, but in Xia Bai's opinion, Bailan's gaze at this moment could be described as burning. She stared at Xia Bai in front of her, with a slight smile on her lips and sparkling eyes, completely unaware of the probing meaning in Xia Bai's eyes. What the hell is this? Xia Bai was a little embarrassed, so he could only cough dryly, clear his throat to calm down, and then decided to bite the bullet and speak. But at this moment, from outside the crowd, another voice suddenly sounded. What is going on? Do you know this is a hospital? A group of people in military uniforms poured in outside, and they didn't know what they were doing. Under the leadership of a bearded soldier in front, they poured in and separated the crowd, but he obviously knew this place for a long time situation. He came over to the position of the group of people on Xia Bai's side and shouted, I heard that some captain is awake. Get out of my way. Obviously, they are here to cause trouble. Just like Li Guangzhi's previous warning, some people didn't want Xia Bai to wake up, and some didn't want Xia Bai to return to his battleship. The bearded soldier and a dozen people squeezed in from the outside of the huge crowd. He seemed extremely arrogant. He thought that no one here would disobey him, but unfortunately, the execution of just getting out of the way was not that good. No one in the crowd along the way took the initiative to get out of the way. I can only use my body shape to force it out. What made this bearded man feel even more weird was that around him, the people who did not hide away looked at him with strange eyes, as if they were looking at something novel. Everyone around you looks at you with a look that you can't understand. This is a very scary phenomenon and situation for anyone, and this bearded soldier is no exception. Only halfway through, they were no longer as arrogant as before, and their pace also slowed down, appearing a little hesitant. But despite this, they also came to the periphery of the crowd of fleet members in the center here. The bearded soldier saw Xia Bai standing in the center through the crowd. He was slightly stunned, and then he remembered what he wanted to do, but at this moment, Xia Bai suddenly smiled at him one time. This smile made the bearded soldier completely stunned. At this moment, various thoughts came to his mind. Is that Xia Bai? Why is he laughing? What is he laughing at? Is there any conspiracy? Did he plan the current scene? At this moment, the bearded man's face changed drastically, and he stood there blankly. For a moment, he felt as if he had fallen into a huge conspiracy and trap, and he did not dare to make any more rash moves. But Xia Bai's smile really didn't mean anything else. In Xia Bai's opinion, it is not an exaggeration to think that this guy's appearance helped him to get out of trouble briefly. Therefore, he smiled at the bearded man in front of him to show his friendliness. Then this guy raised his hand, waved it from a high place, and said, I'm here to thank you all. Thank you all. Without everyone's efforts, we wouldn't be standing here alive during the battle in Xinjiang. But the situation is not stable yet. The war is still not over. Now, I still need your help and your strength. A car will come to pick us up in a while. The brothers who are still injured and need treatment will stay here for the time being. The rest will be with me. Return to the battleship. We have to find a way to get our battleships flying again. After Xia Bai finished speaking, everyone burst into commotion and cheers, as if the backbone was back. Xia Bai thought to himself that his treatment was really different from before. He smiled slightly and immediately asked Tao Zhuang to sort out those who could return to the battleship immediately. He pulled Bailan over and asked, are there only this many people left in our battleship, Bai? Line said, I don't know the specific situation. I was in this hospital when I woke up, but that shouldn't be the case. I heard that there are still many of our people in Shen City. Xia Bai nodded, thinking that this was the case. He started to evacuate the fleet members before the battleship crashed. The escape cabins of his battleship were all at the level of space escape cabins. The alien battleship was destroyed immediately. No, maybe there are only so many people left. Chapter 356 Shensheng. Chapter 360 Shensheng. After all, the bearded soldier did nothing and just watched helplessly as Xia Bai roared away with his people. Li Guangzhi's words are still very useful, although he is now seriously ill in bed. After this battle, Xia Bai and his core members did not suffer any losses after all. There are still a few people like Xia Bai who completely ignore the battleship's defensive measures. Hao Zuan, Bailan and Chen Shai and Cheng, who were in the hospital, were all recovering well and now followed Xia Bai directly towards Shensheng. As for Yi Hanyu and Li Jinggang, they and other members of the fleet kept their hands on the falling position of the Shensheng battleship. The periphery of Xia Bai's survivor base was already surrounded by zombies, but with the military's escort, it was only a matter of time before he could leave here. Shensheng's military strength is indeed stronger than that of the three eastern provinces. After a previous war, they still have the ability to have manpower to open up the situation everywhere, face zombies, create new survivors, sort out the ruins of Shensheng, etc. Everything is fine in apple pie order. Although Shensheng's top executives have always been restless, none of these really important things went wrong. But the scale of the corpse tied in the hatching area still exceeded Xia Bai's imagination. There was an armored brigade escorting Xia Bai. It took several hours to reach Shensheng from the survivor base where the hospital was located. During this period, they almost for the first time, they were trapped in a dense tide of corpses and even needed military fighter jets to clear the way for them. And before that, where were there so many zombies roaming around in the entire hatching area? Xia Bai's battleship had been operating in hatching before, and he knew the situation here quite well. Intelligent zombies are also growing. Although humans are now powerful, and they have been silent for a long time, the gathering speed of this zombie tide alone is far faster than before. It can be seen that they are also accumulating energy strength. It's a pity that the final structure of the battle in Shensheng did not go in a direction favorable to the intelligent zombies, and Xia Bai knew better that, even if Shensheng was destroyed by the Glacier battleship, the intelligent zombies would not achieve any form of victory because by then, they and those ordinary zombies will be weapons driven by alien creatures. Intelligent zombies are the most tragic species born in this era. Xia Bai realized, however, why the alien creatures in the previous life would completely destroy mankind with zombies after they came to the Earth 5 years later, because the alien creatures did not have enough manpower. That Glacier warship, including the 2 manta ray aircraft, is only 3 ships in total. How could they travel around the world to kill humans one by one? It can be seen from the disregard and shocking attitude of the Glacier battleship when it appeared on Shen City before. They don't care about humans at all. In the previous life, they wanted to actively destroy humans. I'm afraid that it was because Shen City tried to shut down their atmosphere modification system. Thoughts it doesn't feel good, but for humans right now, it's a good thing. It was precisely because of this disregard that what came was a Glacier battleship instead of a truly terrifying starship that crisscrossed the starry sky. Xia Bai had more opportunities to move around. Along the way, Xia Bai was in a state of absolute protection. The armored brigade protecting him was a unit directly under Xiang Hongsheng, and there would never be any problems. Xia Bai also had a rare experience of being completely protected without having to do anything. Along the way, Xia Bai also talked a lot with Chen Shai and Cheng. There were too many details to discuss about the war at that time. Chen Shai and Cheng also seemed to blame himself. He said that the warship had deviated from a certain position at the time, otherwise, he might have been able to stop the loss, but Xia Bai knew clearly that the situation at that time, with the power of the Glacier battleship, it was impossible for the battleship to withstand it. No matter what. The journey was uneventful. It was already dusk when Xia Bai entered the Shensheng area. At the end of Shensheng, billowing black smoke columns were rising. At the end of Shensheng, in the direction of the coast, there were gunshots. Some shrill and terrifying howls were also accompanied by the gunshots. Far away came point. Extreme mutants had landed from the ocean point. As far as Xia Bai knows, there are two main reasons why Shenzhen was able to defend itself and was not even affected by the extreme mutants in the ocean. First, it was the powerful force of Shenzhen and Jinling military region. Second, it was because of the thing that the Glacier battleship destroyed and the existence of that thing that made those extreme mutants from the ocean stay away from Shenzhen point. But now, that thing was destroyed by the Glacier battleship and no longer has that ability. Those extreme mutants followed the smell of human blood here and surged up crazily. Point now, the military has established a defense line along the coast, exchanging fire with those terrifying creatures day and night. Point Xia Bai still doesn't know what it is. Although Li Guangji has promised to open all the information to Xia Bai for free, Xia Bai still needs time to understand it. Point moreover, Xia Bai heard that the situation in the ocean is the worst. For humans, the current ocean is as dangerous and terrifying as space. It is full of terrifying creatures. Point. But now Xia Bai obviously had not yet arrived to estimate all these things. He returned to Shenzhen and went straight to the location of his battleship. Point Xianghangsheng is currently in the hatching area, so it is impossible to come to see Xia Bai. Point. But Li Guangji's energy was astonishing. After he made a promise to Xia Bai, except for Xia Bai's previous troubles in the hospital at the hatching survivor base, he never encountered any obstruction. He walked through the streets and alleys. Almost completely half of the city of Shanghai was reduced to ruins and came to the shores of the Pujiang River, where the battleship fell. Point along the way, many people had heard about the arrival of Xia Bai, the captain of the battleship. Whether survivors or soldiers, many people were visiting on the streets, but just like in the previous hospital, most people looked at Xia Bai with a look of awe. No one came close, only looked at him from afar. But before Xia Bai arrived at the battleship, another thing came to greet him. Point in the sky, a drone produced by a warship was hovering in the distance, stopped in front of the entire convoy, and drove forward alongside the entire convoy. Point this was obviously Li Jinggang coming to say hello. Point and soon, the huge warship stranded on the bank of Pujiang River appeared in front of Xia Bai. Point in the bloody light of the setting sun, the armor of the battleship was reflecting dazzling light. Chapter 357 Yi Hanayu is in action. Chapter 361 Yi Hanayu is in action. The battleship was severely damaged. Point viewed from a distance, the entire battleship was torn apart, as if a blade had torn it apart from the middle to the front half of the battleship. The entire battleship was riddled with holes, with charred burn marks everywhere, and small half of the structure has even sunk under the water, and the disconnected structure sways slightly with the turbulence of the water waves. 95% damage meant that more than 90% of the battleship's functions and structure had collapsed. Point outside the battleship, there were many staff surrounding this behemoth. Most of these people were military staff. With Xia Bai's arrival, a team immediately came out from inside. The leader was an acquaintance of Xia Bai, Secretary Wu, who had been beaten up by Xia Bai before. Point when Xia Bai saw this guy from a distance, he couldn't help but smile. It was a coincidence that he could meet this guy now. Point Xia Bai also knew that Li Guangji could help Xia Bai overcome most of the obstacles, but there were still some people who might not be willing to blame a dying person. Point moreover, Xia Bai's battleship is placed here. Even if it falls, people will not forget its shocking figure moving through the sky before. It is normal for people to covet it. Point the Glacier battleship has completely disintegrated, and no one can defeat it. But Xia Bai's battleship is parked here. Even if it is scarred, it is a huge piece of fat for anyone. Point therefore, when Xia Bai came here, those who coveted him could no longer sit still. Point however, this time, Secretary Wu seemed to have learned the lesson from the last time. When he saw Xia Bai, he seemed much more polite and said directly, "Mr. Xia, I'm glad to see you. We have received instructions from Secretary Li, and we will assist you repair this battleship." Xia Bai glanced at him, smiled slightly, and said, "Look, how nice this is. You are so polite when talking to me, Secretary." Wu couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. Point before this guy could say anything, an extremely hearty voice suddenly came from the other side. Xia Bai, hearing this voice, it was Xia Bai who twitched the corner of his mouth. Point he turned his head stiffly and looked in the direction of the sound point over there. The owner of this voice, Yihan, was walking towards this side with a spring breeze on his face. This guy didn't feel the slightest bit after a big battle. The look on his face was exactly the same as when Xia Bai saw this guy the first day. Yihan looked very happy. That was really happy. In fact, Yihan has regained consciousness long ago. As an awakened person, she has an amazing physique and good luck. She was hardly affected by the collision, so she stayed here. At that time, Xia Bai and Bailan were in the same situation. Yihan watched with her own eyes when he was sent away in a coma. Now seeing these two people reappearing alive in front of her, she certainly seemed very happy. To be honest, when Xia Bai saw her, his heart warmed up slightly. But when this guy ran up to him, Xia Bai straightened his expression slightly, rushed to Secretary Wu and said, "Secretary Wu, this is my secretary Yihan. If anything happens, just tell her." With that said, Xia Bai took direct steps towards the battleship behind. Yihan was confused by Xia Bai's words. What, an? For some reason, Secretary Wu looked at Yihan in front of her, and her face looked a little inexplicably ugly. Bailan looked at this scene, smiled slightly, and then stopping here, and moved forward. Hao Zuan, on the other hand, didn't know which muscle was wrong. After thinking about it, he stood silently next to Yihan and said directly, "Secretary Yi, I support you." Yihan looked at this guy, the corners of her mouth twitched a bit. She glared at Hao Zuan, looked at Secretary Wu here, and said with a smile, "You don't need you. Secretary Wu and I are old acquaintances. You say so, no?" Secretary Wu, hearing such words, Secretary Wu's expression became even more ugly in front of Yihan. Obviously, these two people had a lot of communication in the past 2 days. As for the content of these two people's exchanges, Xia Bai, who handed Secretary Wu to Yihan, had already walked into the wreckage of the battleship. There are currently two factions running the place. One of them is the original crew of the battleship headed by Yihan and Li Jingyang, the real owner of the battleship, while the other faction is Secretary Wu's faction, which has armed personnel. There are also scientific researchers, and so on. Yihan took the first step, and Li Jingyang was behind. Although Secretary Wu's group did not want Xia Bai to enter the battleship, it was difficult for them to do anything with the people sent by Li Jingyang and Xiang Hansheng. Especially when Xia Bai approached the battleship, the entire intact part of the battleship suddenly lit up. In the fading skylight, the battleship's light was bright and dazzling, almost lighting up the entire coastal area. Just like when the battleship crisscrossed the sky before, it seemed as if it could immediately rise from the ground and crisscross the 9 heavens again. The staff who have been working nearby have been here for 2 days, but this is the first time they have seen the battleship light up like this. Everyone around them looked surprised. And then, Alpha's voice came from the battleship and echoed here. "Welcome back, Captain." Alpha's voice was as fair and peaceful as ever, but the battleship's energy was obviously insufficient. After this brief welcome, the lights on the battleship dimmed immediately, and Alpha's voice completely disappeared. However, this was enough. There was silence in the field, and no one stopped in front of Xia Bai. Xia Bai smiled slightly, and moved forward directly, entered the battleship, and headed straight for the bridge. He wanted to see how many energy points the battleship had left, enough to repair his own battleship. On the other side, Yihan also smiled and said, "Do you still want to fight for this ship?" After saying this, Yihan also turned around, left Secretary Wu where he was, and walked towards the battleship. Secretary Wu stayed where he was, looking at the battleship over there, and couldn't help but grit his teeth slightly. They had worked hard here for 2 days before, but they couldn't find anything useful from this battleship. But right now, that Xia Bai has just come back. After a moment, Secretary Wu took another step, called his people over there, and followed Xia Bai and the others directly into the battleship. No matter what, she would seize every opportunity. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 358, An Unexpected Surprise. Chapter 362. An unexpected surprise. Secretary Wu was destined to be disappointed. Xia Bai led people straight into the bridge. After entering the bridge, he directly cleared out the staff on the bridge and asked all his crew members to take over the already shabby ship. A crappy battleship. Secretary Wu could only be cleared out. The situation in the entire battleship is in a mess, but the bridge of the battleship is still intact. However, a lot of facilities have been set up here by the scientific researchers sent by Secretary Wu, but without Xia Bai's authority, any of the bridge of the battleship is intact. The facilities may be activated, let alone any useful research. Less than 2 days were not enough time to even demolish it. Alpha has scanned Xia Bai's arrival. Some of the battleship's facilities have lit up slightly, and its voice echoed in the bridge. "Welcome back, Captain." The battleship glowed slightly. At this moment, Xia Bai was the only one on the bridge. The others were all sent out by Xia Bai to maintain the situation in the battleship. No matter what, this is Xia Bai's battleship. Those unimportant people and those who covet this battleship can stay outside the battleship, but don't think about staying in the battleship anymore. Xia Bai walked towards the captain's seat in the middle and said, "Alpha, report the detailed damage to the battleship." The current damage to the battleship has reached 95%. The battleship's engine system, power system, shield system, radar system, and life support system are seriously damaged. The battleship's medical module is completely destroyed, and the main accommodation module is 100% damaged. 70 is separated from the main structure. Xia Bai listened to Alpha's report and came to the captain's seat. He activated the main control interface. When it lit up, Xia Bai touched the armrest of the captain's seat and hidden it. The energy point black box fell out. Energy points are needed to repair the battleship, so what Xia Bai is most concerned about now is how many energy points he has left. He had put all his bets on this battle before. At the last moment of the war, his battleship was still building weapons and consuming energy points. Xia Bai remembered the last battleship he looked at. The battleship only had more than 200,000 energy points left. Clicked. Therefore, when Xia Bai opened the energy point black box now, he actually didn't have much hope. However, Xia Bai only glanced at it, but his color changed slightly. Because the length of the number string displayed on it was far beyond Xia Bai's expectation. He squinted his eyes and took a closer look before confirming that there were now more than 12 million energy points in the battleship's energy point black box. Xia Bai dared to say that he had never seen so many energy points in his life. In the first moment, Xia Bai thought he was dazzled, or there was something wrong with the display system of this thing. But then, Xia Bai noticed that in the long test tube shaped container under the display screen, there was a small pool of liquid, which was emitting an extremely dim and imperceptible shimmer. Judging from the volume of this liquid, it is obviously more than the 2 drops of 5 million energy points that the Xia Bai 6th level battleship had when it was first upgraded, and much more. Equipment can go wrong, but it never goes wrong. Xia Bai said, "Alpha, what's going on with the energy points? These 12 million, Alpha's response was as swift as ever. The moment Xia Bai asked, it stopped announcing the warship's battle damage assessment and instead responded to Xia Bai's question. The attack carrying the quantity of our ship hit and destroyed when the enemy battleship is hit. These energy points are the abundant energy pulled back to the battleship through our measuring spear. A small part of it is the abundant energy we collected during the battle, but because the battleship was seriously damaged, a large number of the energy has escaped, and the degree of energy contraction is only about 80%. When Xia Bai heard this, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. 80% and 12 million. This was indeed an unexpected gain that Xia Bai had not imagined. The energy points contributed by that glacier battleship to Xia Bai's battleship were simply astronomical. If it were replaced by zombies, 12 million zombies, how long would Xia Bai have to kill? Give me another dozen of these alien battleships. Of course, Xia Bai just thought about this idea. If another group of glacier battleships or even enemy ships stronger than the glacier battleships came, Xia Bai would probably have to flee, regardless of how many energy points they were worth. Those are not his. While Xia Bai was thinking, Alpha had once again begun assessing the damage to the battleship. It seemed to be more anxious than Xia Bai about repairing the battleship point at this moment. Alpha finally finished reading the long battle damage report of the battleship and concluded, it is estimated that 957,631 energy points will be needed to restore the battleship to its pre-war level. It is estimated that 77 energy points will be needed to repair the battleship. Hours, 14 minutes and 6 seconds. Opinion. On battleship repair, it is recommended to evacuate all living creatures from the battleship, which can increase the repair speed of the battleship. It is recommended to start repairs immediately. The backup energy module inside the battleship is seriously damaged, and the energy share of the remaining functional units is less than 1%. Alpha was chattering here, but Xia Bai noticed another point. In Alpha's description just now, he mentioned two concepts that Xia Bai had never heard of to describe the process of the battleship collecting energy points. What is that? Xia Bai was curious in his heart, but just as he was about to ask, the battleship suddenly burst, and the lights in the bridge, which were bright just now, suddenly went out one by one. Along with the lighting lights, the battleship's various display screens and even the light of the captain's main control platform in front of Xia Bai dimmed immediately. The entire bridge fell into complete darkness in an instant. Even just now, he was speaking like a repeater. The Alpha who kept talking was instantly silenced. Alpha? Xia Bai tentatively called out Point Alpha, who usually responded immediately to the captain's inquiries and only had the intelligence of a captain to flatter him. Rarely responded at all this time. Xia Bai thought of what Alpha had just said. The remaining functional unit energy share was less than 1%. Damn. It can't be that the battery is completely out, can it? The fact is that the battleship is completely out of power. To put it more strictly, there is no energy point. Xia Bai was also speechless for a while. But the current situation is always good. This sudden arrival of 12 million energy points is a surprise to Xia Bai. Otherwise, according to the original plan, he would have planned to rely on the battleship's energy collection device. The military's troops in the coastal areas can directly and quickly accumulate energy points, but judging from the current situation, this step can be omitted. Chapter 359 Falling Aircraft. Chapter 363 The Crashed Aircraft. On the evening of May 13th, 2122, the light of the Xia Bai battleship once again illuminated the night sky of Shanghai Point. This repair of the 6th level battleship is comparable to reconstruction. The entire battleship was engulfed in light, and the energy points were drained away like a flood. Before that, Xia Bai also withdrew from the inner cabin of the battleship, and was now standing outside the battleship staring at this behemoth. In addition to him, other members of the battleship were also outside, setting up a cordon of defense to block others, especially Secretary Wu. Xia Bai took one look, and walked towards another group of people. It was a member of the battleship's fighter formation. Xia Bai had just scraped together 8 pilots before. After this battle, Xian, the captain of Xia Bai's fighter formation, was dead, and only 4 pilots were left. Seeing Xia Bai coming over, they couldn't help but lower their heads. At the last moment of the previous battleship, they all had the idea of escape. Now seeing Xia Bai, they seemed a little ashamed. But they still came back and still appeared here as members of the fleet, which seemed to mean that their psychology had completely changed again. Or maybe Xian's last bump made them really change their minds. Xia Bai didn't know the details. He only knew that in the end, it was Xian from the White Pigeon fighter formation who knocked down the Manta aircraft after the battleship crashed, and Alpha didn't recover. It was also these pilots who opened the bridge hatch, allowing military medical staff to bring Xia Bai and the others out. Xia Bai patted their shoulders and said a few words. Then his attention was attracted by another thing. The military captured a Manta aircraft. The overall structure of the Manta aircraft was still intact, and it became the only remaining thing of the alien Glacier battleship on the Earth. It landed on the other side of the city far away from the Xia Bai battleship, and was immediately captured by the military. Secretly controlled. Xia Bai also just learned about the news. He took action immediately. He asked Hao Zhuang and others to stay here. He took the Awakener Yi Hanyu and a team of people under Jing Xiang Guiyang to let Chief Xiang Hong Sheng and Xiang Zhao Jiangong, the guard squad leader, led the way and headed directly to the current location of the manta ray aircraft point. In this regard, Zhao Jiangong also secretly asked Chief Xiang for instructions. After all, this kind of matter involved military secrets. He, the squad leader of a small security class, could not do this kind of thing, even if he was connected with Xiang Hongsheng. Lords, however, Li Guangji had already discovered what was going on and shared all the resources and information with Xia Bai. Of course, such a manta ray aircraft was also included in all the resources and information. The manta ray aircraft landed close to the land and hit an old-fashioned small bungalow, causing half of the street to collapse. Although Xia Bai heard the news that the military had captured the manta ray aircraft, Xia Bai came closer and realized that this was not the case. This entire area is strictly controlled by the military. The 3 inner and outer floors are all armored units. There are people and guns watching this thing 24 hours a day. The only progress at the moment is that the energy of the manta ray aircraft, which was previously like a hedgehog and refused to be approached by anyone, has been exhausted. Now, a joint force composed of the military, engineers and scientific researchers is approaching the aircraft for the first time. Xia Bai's arrival caused a small sensation. Maybe in Shenzhen now, some people don't want Xia Bai to wake up and even covered Xia Bai's battleship, but for ordinary soldiers, the warship commander who knocked down the alien glacier battleship, a title like Guan was enough for them to show full respect to Xia Bai. In particular, in a sense, these soldiers were actually the ones who fought alongside Xia Bai at that time. But Xia Bai was still stopped at the perimeter. Because the manta ray aircraft was extremely dangerous and the situation was unknown, the military still hoped that Xia Bai could stay in a safe area and wait until the situation became clear before entering. But this time, it was the first time that Xia Bai saw the manta ray aircraft so close. The thing was flat. The color of the entire fuselage was the same as that of the glacier battleship. They were both as dark and cold as the starry sky. Moreover, from a distance, the battleship seemed to have no trace of the splicing of plates. The entire aircraft, it's like a complete structure built in one piece. Its entire volume is far larger than that of an average human fighter, but it has also been severely damaged. Its complete and exquisite structure is no longer there. The left wing has disappeared, and there is also a lot of burns on the engine position at the tail. Mark of. Xia Bai took a look and couldn't help but said, "It also fell from the sky. Why does this thing look more elegant than my battleship?" Yi Hanyu, who was standing next to Xia Bai, curled her lips. "People are stupid. Battleship low." The lethality of Yi Hanyu's words was unimaginable. After saying this, Xia Bai fell silent and only squinted his eyes to look into the distance. It was late at night, and the night in Shenzhen was as dark and cold as ever. The entire venue was illuminated by the lighting equipment set up by the military. Xia Bai was standing on a 7-story building outside the military cordon. On the roof of the small building, looking from this direction, you can clearly see the location of the manta ray aircraft over there. Xia Bai could clearly see that in that direction, a team of military, engineers and scientific researchers were approaching quickly. They circled around the manta ray aircraft, but they might not be able to find anything obvious. The location of the hatch and entrance was directly used to violently demolish it, and a hole was drilled from the outside of the manta ray aircraft to penetrate. The military seems to have already tested the strength of the manta ray aircraft's external armor and directly brought in a high-power laser cutting machine to cut open the manta ray aircraft bit by bit from the outside. All the non-combatants retreated, while the military's tactical team came up and cut open the outer armor of the manta aircraft while aiming their guns at this position. If there was any abnormality, they would fire at any time. Please subscribe to the official version. Chapter 360, Watching the Fun. Chapter 364, Watching the Fun. But the whole process was surprisingly smooth. Without any accidents, the military opened a corner of the outer armor of the manta ray aircraft and did not find the possible non-human pilot inside. However, the structure inside the manta ray aircraft was completely contrary to the human physiological structure. Therefore, if you continue to explore, you will continue to demolish it. The thrilling exploration of an alien ship quickly turns into a lengthy teardown. The damage to this manta ray aircraft was far more serious than imagined, and as the team continued to dismantle and advance, people gradually discovered that this seemingly huge manta ray aircraft was actually the real control room. It only accounts for 20% of it, and this is basically an unmanned fighter aircraft. The core control system is a palm-sized computer. Just a few hours ago, the remaining power system of this manta ray aircraft was completely disintegrated. This computer fell into dormancy completely like Alpha. Therefore, this aircraft, which had always been like a hedgehog and refused human access, completely lost its defense and attack capabilities after the situation stabilized. Armed security personnel withdrew after confirming that there were no safety hazards. Next came scientists and even engineers from various fields who wanted to thoroughly study this alien spacecraft from the inside out point. But at this moment, Xia Bai had obtained all the information related to the manta ray aircraft currently in the hands of the military. Shenzhen's previous collision also caused immeasurable damage to the spacecraft. There are not many valuable things, but the structure of the spacecraft can be used for reference. As for other information, without cracking the control core in the manta ray aircraft, who can possibly get any useful information from such a pile of scrap metal that may be scrapped at any time point? But what is certain is that during the previous battle in Shenzhen, on May 11th, after the electromagnetic interference weakened, the manta ray aircraft did indeed transmit a message into deep space. It is an exclusive transmitter. Located at the core of the entire manta ray aircraft, it emits signals into deep space and is independent of the system of the entire manta ray aircraft. Therefore, although military scientists have not yet cracked the computer kernel, but went one step ahead and found the original content of the message they sent. Of course, the original content cannot be deciphered in a short time. The only thing that can be confirmed is that the manta ray aircraft's deep space launch equipment is not strong to begin with, and it has been severely damaged by the previous electromagnetic pulse. Although there is no damage, the original information sent is incomplete. After being intercepted by the US military in space, even if there are electromagnetic wave signals projected into deep space, the amount of information carried must be extremely limited. Considering the space, if the distance is too long, when the message reaches the target location, there may only be fragments or even a few words left. Xia Bai looked at this message, but he couldn't be happy, no matter what point, because no matter how much information the other party can receive in the end, it means that the other party will definitely get the information, which is never a good thing. But Xia Bai also knew that there was nothing that could be done about it. When that electromagnetic pulse torpedo hit, even the Glacier battleship was extinguished, and the entire city of Shanghai was affected. With the current technology of mankind, it is impossible to recover within a short period of time and completely intercept it. But in Xia Bai's view, it doesn't matter if the information is sent out. If he knocks out one of his ships, he will be discovered sooner or later. If the other party doesn't pay attention to this place, he will never come. But if the other party pays attention to this place, no matter what, whether the manta ray aircraft spreads the news, the other party will definitely send more powerful forces. Moreover, the one that comes next time will definitely be an unrivaled enemy that far surpasses this Glacier battleship. This truth is extremely simple, even if Xia Bai thinks about it himself. Is my Glacier battleship lost with you this time? Oh. Okay, next time I will use my strongest fighting strength. Even if it is not the strongest, you will definitely not be able to defeat me, leaving you no chance. It's like swatting a mosquito with a fly swatter. If it doesn't kill a mosquito, wouldn't a normal person just swat it to death after being surprised? Of course, the strength of the opponent's warships must also be limited. A sufficiently powerful civilization can produce powerful enough battleships. Xia Bai was silent for a moment, but then turned to ask the military soldier next to him who was docking with him. It is said that the US military satellite intercepted it. What is the situation? The soldier was stunned for a moment, as if he didn't expect Xia Bai to ask him a question, and said nervously, well, this is, the war broke out in Shenzhen at that time, and the US military should have come to see the situation. Xia Bai rubbed his chin. This old beauty, are you watching the fun? However, this is not just watching the fun, right? He pondered for a moment and said, you guys should study the computer from the manta aircraft first, and see if you can get any results. If not, just wait 2 days and I will bring that thing to my battleship. Go up there. Xia Bai's battleship is currently being repaired. Even if the core main control unit of the manned-array aircraft is handed over to Xia Bai has nothing to do. Why not let the military see if they can figure out any useful information there first? No point. The military's technology cannot be underestimated. Point. But when Xia Bai said this, the soldier was stunned for a moment, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Well, I saw your battleship, glowing. Can it fly again?" Xia Bai glanced at him and smiled. "Of course it can. It can rise to the sky of Shen City again in 3 days at most." When the soldier heard this, he showed joy from the bottom of his heart and said, "That's great. That's great." Whether Xia Bai's battleship can fly or not, he seems to be more happy and excited than anyone else. Xia Bai smiled slightly. There was no progress in the situation here, so he asked Jing Xiangyang to lead people to watch here. After 3 days, his battleship was repaired, and then he brought back the main control unit of the manned-array aircraft. In the battleship, the main reason why Jing Xiangyang stayed was because he was worried about being boarded first by some random people in the middle. The battleship began to be repaired. Looking at the manned-array aircraft that crashed to the ground, Xia Bai felt that time was running out even more. He must seize the time to deal with every imminent matter and then continue to upgrade, and upgrade to the point where no one can benefit from it, no matter who comes to the earth. Chapter 361 Method. Chapter 365 Method. After leaving the crash point of the manned-array aircraft, Xia Bai did not return to the battleship. Instead, he got into the car prepared for him by Zhao Jiangang and went directly to the temporary experimental center on the edge of Shanghai City. He had already communicated with the military in advance and wanted to know the current situation of the atmospheric modification system and how they could shut it down. Shanghai experienced a war, and there were many ruins and wreckage in the streets and alleys. Although the level of radiation was not high, the military evacuated the vast majority of people in the city in a short period of time. Of course, there is actually no place to resettle these survivors. The sick and injured, and those with higher priority were all evacuated to the base in Heching. However, it is also a semi-military base structure. The area originally opened is not large, and even more so, there is no room for so many people. Therefore, now a large number of survivors are mostly gathered in the outer city area of Shenzhen. The interior of Shenzhen is empty, except for some military people who are in a hurry, or some survivors with ordinary supplies. Wandering around, there are almost no other living people in sight. Such silence is rare. The road was full of potholes and the car was driving rickety. Xia Bai didn't know why, but he fell asleep leaning against the window of the back seat. When the car arrived, he slowly woke up. At this time, he found that he didn't know when he put on a small denim jacket. He couldn't help but turn his head and look at Yi Hanyu, who was sitting in the passenger seat with him. Of course these clothes belonged to Yi Hanyu. This guy didn't know where he got a denim suit. Now that the top was on Xia Bai's body, she was only wearing a thin white half-sleeved shirt, which showed off her figure quite well. This high school student didn't know when did it develop. Xia Bai slept a little confused and thought carefully about the question that popped up in his head instinctively. After all, it has been 5 years since the end of the world, and he was already in high school 5 years ago. As if aware of Xia Bai's gaze, Yi Hanyu also turned her head and glanced at him. In 5 years, her temperament has remained the same as before, with no change. She glanced at Xia Bai and smiled. "Don't be moved, I am. Awakened ones, it's not easy to catch a cold. You're a guy who can get a concussion even if you fall, so be careful." Xia Bai smiled and said, "It's obviously a good thing to care about people, but why did it change after you said this?" Yi Hanyu said, "Hey, you mean I have a poisonous tongue?" Xia Bai didn't respond, opened the door, and got out of the car with Yi Hanyu's clothes on. He was half a head taller than Yi Hanyu, so the clothes on him looked a bit small and funny. Yi Hanyu shouted from behind, "Hey, you said I can't speak, but you took off my clothes." Xia Bai acted as if he didn't hear anything, and went directly to Yu Yun, who had come out to greet him early. Inside the car, Yi Hanyu turned her head angrily and saw Zhao Jiangang in front of him smiling at her. Yi Hanyu was even more annoyed. At this moment, Xia Bai had already walked in front of Yu Yun. The female scientist was wearing a white coat and a pair of black rimmed glasses, with her hands in her pockets. When she saw Xia Bai, she smiled slightly and said, "I thought you would come back tomorrow. After all, it is too late today." Xia Bai joked, "How can I possibly sleep when I think that I might die just by taking a breath of air in 2 days?" Yu Yun squinted her glasses and smiled. After a moment, she stopped the smile on her face and said seriously, "Thank you." Xia Bai was a little surprised that she was so solemn. "What are you thanking me for?" "Thank you for being alive. Thank you for knocking that ship out of the sky." Xia Bai smiled slightly and said, "Luckily, it just can't kill me. There's nothing we can do." Yu Yun knew that Xia Bai's victory in that battle was not due to luck. At this time, Yi Hanyu also ran up from behind and followed Xia Bai all the way to the building behind. As for how to solve the atmospheric modification system that aliens put on the Earth, the military has already set up a special team to study the aliens' atmospheric modification module and try to come up with a feasible plan in the shortest possible time. Although Xia Bai came late, but almost no one here was asleep, and Xia Bai didn't meet everyone. He just met directly with the person in charge of the project, academician Zhang Yidong, under the guidance of Yu Yun. This is an old man with grey hair. He looks older than Li Guangji, but he has one thing that is very similar to Li Guangji, that is, they both look energetic. Even though their bodies are old, their mental state is better than that of many young people. Be healthy. Zhang Yidong is not a person who likes to be polite. After a few words with Xia Bai, he went straight to the topic. Xia Bai didn't know much about this aspect. However, Zhang Yidong obviously had experience in dealing with people like Xia Bai. What he said, they were as close as possible to the important parts that Xia Bai could understand. Professor Yuan originally meant to start directly from the upper level system of the atmosphere modification system and work backwards to find its upper level nodes and see if we can start from the upper level nodes. Just shut down the entire transformation system. Xia Bai knew that the Professor Yuan Zhang Yidong was talking about was the person in charge of the experimental base in Langjia area, but he had died in the first attack of the man-to-ray aircraft. Zhang Yidong said, "But, Mr. Cause death. So although this method is the simplest and probably the most efficient, it can't be used now." Xia Bai couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth slightly when he heard this. He didn't know why, but when he heard what the other party said, why did he always feel that the other party was insinuating that he was blaming himself for blowing up the Glacier battleship to rubbish? But Xia Bai didn't show any dissatisfaction. This was not the first time he communicated with such a scholar. He knew that the other party had no other meaning. Xia Bai looked very sincere and said, "Then do we have any other options now?" Zhang Yidong said, "Yes, of course there is. If not, I wouldn't come to see you today. Although this atmospheric modification system can be turned off in one go through the superior node, it is located on the Earth after all. The overall structure is like a gas pipeline. There is also a main valve on the Earth. As long as you find it and find a way to crack its system and make it completely offline, you can shut down the entire atmosphere modification system." Chapter 362 Two Systems. Chapter 366 Two Systems. Zhang Yidong said, "If we can turn off this master valve and take the entire atmosphere modification system located on the Earth offline, as long as it is completely shut down, it will take at most 100 years for the Earth to be completely restored to its original state." Xia Bai didn't care much about restoring the state in 100 years. Xia Bai asked, "So, does shutting down the system mean that now, our planet, we humans, will not be able to survive? Will they all become extinct again because of its existence?" "That's right." Zhang Yidong nodded and said, "This is indeed true in theory." Xia Bai couldn't help but let out a long breath and said, "So, where is the main valve of this atmospheric modification system?" Zhang Yidong said, "We are still positioning. Through this current module, we are tracing and reconstructing the distribution of its entire atmospheric modification system on the Earth. because when you knock down that glacier battleship, one of its the only intermediate feedback node has been destroyed, and the upward transmission of alerts caused by the measures we take to modify the atmosphere will be interrupted due to the interruption of this node. Xia Bai thought for a while and said, in other words, it was a good thing that I destroyed the glacier battleship. Zhang Yiden glanced at Xia Bai when he heard this, but did not answer the question. Xia Bai looked a little embarrassed but Xia Bai didn't say anything, but just nodded slightly, signaling the other party to continue talking. Zhang Yiden said, after the Battle of Shenzhen, we started the tracing process. Now we have traced the unit locations of 57 atmospheric modification modules. Although we cannot yet locate the exact location of the master valve, we have now what is confirmed is that it should be somewhere in the Pacific Ocean now. Pacific Ocean? Xia Bai frowned slightly and said, the current situation in the Pacific Ocean is not good. Although Xia Bai said it was not very good, the real situation was far from being as simple as not being very good. Xia Bai had been in the Shenzhen area of Liao province before, which was quite close to the coastline. Therefore, although Xia Bai had never been to the sea, he still knew something about the situation in the sea. At present, not only the Pacific Ocean, but also the entire sea area of the Earth has become a place where demon habitats are filled with all kinds of strange creatures, and they are clustered and terrifying. And it is said that the deeper you go in the sea, the bigger and more terrifying the monster becomes. Just imagine what a giant whale will become if it is infected and becomes an extreme mutant. Humanity has not been able to completely conquer the sea before the end of the world, and it is even more impossible now. It is difficult for any warship to sail a long distance in the ocean, let alone maintain long-term maritime operations and navigation. If the master valve is really deep in the Pacific Ocean, then this is definitely a big trouble. Of course, for Xia Bai, this was still acceptable. His warships are far above any warships, and his warships can even enter the ocean. Even from another perspective, the sea is like the starry sky, except that its medium is water. Next, Zhang Yiden talked a lot with Xia Bai, mostly related to this. According to him, even if the main valve of the atmospheric modification system is located, it will be a problem to close it. This alien atmosphere modification system is a network of its own. If humans want to turn off the entire system, they need to turn its valve to close it. But this valve is not a real valve, but a program. Alien degree. Zhang Yiden said, judging from the current situation, if we want to shut it down in one fell swoop, we must follow its procedures. Otherwise, rash actions are likely to induce its internal security system and allow the entire atmospheric modification system to enter safe mode. That way, the current trouble will no longer work. At that time, we can only find these modules one by one globally and destroy them one by one. Xia Bai knew how difficult this was, sending people to find these alien facilities and destroy them one by one in the apocalypse, where zombies are everywhere, is an unimaginably large project. Even if they want to mobilize the help of survivors and other remaining countries around the world, they can't. You have to get in touch with the other party first, not to mention convincing them one by one that the alien atmosphere modification system must be destroyed. The main valve must be closed. Xia Bai said, have you made any progress in this regard? Zhang Yiden heard this, shook his head, nodded again, and said, yes or not. By deciphering the modules of the atmospheric transformation system we have now, we can conclude that there are two systems in it. The first one, it is the primary network layer, with the power supply to connect other modules and transmit information to upper level nodes. This set is consistent with the system and civilization used by the Glacier battleship and the Manta Ray aircraft. Of course, whether it is completely consistent, we have to wait for the Manta Ray. After the aircraft are compromised, we can make accurate judgments only by obtaining their systems. At this moment, Zhang Yiden obviously didn't know that just tonight, the Manta Ray aircraft had been dismantled, and the core processing unit inside had been taken out. But Xia Bai didn't mean to interrupt. Although Zhang Yiden was the kind of person who didn't care about other people's thoughts when chatting, he had one advantage. He just said what he had to say. He didn't play riddles. He didn't go around in circles, and he didn't talk nonsense. Seeing that Xia Bai didn't speak, Zhang Yiden continued, the second set is very strange. It is the key to the operation of the entire module. It is closely related to the operation and function of the atmosphere transformation system. It can be said that it is the one that maintains the entire atmosphere transformation. The system works step by step and is the key to transforming the entire Earth step by step. However, it has been encrypted layer by layer, and we cannot understand its technology at all. In fact, it may even come from someone other than the Glacier battleship and the Manta Ray aircraft civilization. Xia Bai felt slightly shocked when he heard this. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "You mean, this thing has the technology of 2 civilizations?" "I'm afraid so." It was Yu Yan who answered this sentence. Although we haven't confirmed it yet, judging from the information we have obtained now, it seems that the existence of this atmospheric modification system is not as we originally imagined. Aliens want to transform the Earth into an alien habitable planet suitable for their survival. But, she paused slightly when she said this, and glanced at Zhang Yidong, who said, "You can say that." Yu Yan nodded and said, "It may be creating a hotbed." Chapter 363 Come to my battleship. Chapter 367 Come to my battleship. Yi Hanayu, who had been silent in the corner, looked surprised when she heard this. Xia Bai's brows furrowed even more tightly and said, "Hotbed? What does this mean? What kind of hotbed? What is this hotbed used for?" "This alien atmosphere modification system is technically powerful. This is something Xia Bai has known for a long time. When Xia Bai got the first era module in Bincheng, it was still a 4th level battleship. Although it could not analyze it in any detail, Alpha could not analyze it in detail. Xia Bai has been clearly told that that thing has amazing technology that far exceeds that of humans recently. Xia Bai learned after the battle in Langjia that this is actually an atmosphere modification system that arranges facilities around the world and completely changes the Earth's environment. In Xia Bai's opinion, this is nothing, even normal, alien. Since creatures regard humans as ants and don't care about their life and death, it is understandable that they want to transform the Earth. Haven't humans always been looking for livable planets? Their alien creatures may just be looking for livable planets, but with their technology, they don't need to explore at all, and they don't care about the existence of humans. They can just forcefully modify the atmosphere. This is like building a building. Humans build humans. Even if there is a swarm of ants on the foundation of a building, it can be solved with just a shovel, right? Humanity has only entered the starry sky age and is already so overbearing that it wants to find livable planets. Of course, aliens have this reason to search for planets, and they also have reasons to overbearingly transform your planet regardless of the ideas of the indigenous people. This was Xia Bai's idea after the battle in Langjia, and he didn't think it was a big problem, because judging from the information Xia Bai knew at the time, it was possible for alien creatures to launch an attack on the Earth for this purpose. Almost 100% point. But now he looked at Yu Yan and Zhang Yidong in front of him, hoping to get an accurate and clear answer to let him know what the alien creatures wanted to do on Earth. Zhang Yidong leaned forward slightly and said solemnly, "We don't know what they want to do. This is the truth. We have too little information about them, but Mr. Xia, you have to stay calm, because now we still have it is impossible to fully confirm the accuracy and authenticity of the information we have obtained. After all, we have not yet decoded their system and coding language, and can only guess its role from its representation and characteristics." Xia Bai was silent, and after a moment, he said, "How long will it take for us to know where the main valve of this atmospheric modification system is?" Zhang Yidong said, "I don't know. With our current technology, it may take a month, a year, or even longer." Xia Bai took a breath and said, "What if I can provide you with a better environment?" The laboratory of the 5th level battleship has been completely upgraded, but it has not been officially put into use. The most important thing is that Xia Bai Khan has laboratories and advanced equipment, and even the top computing power of Alpha and battleship computers, but does not real researchers and outside knowledge. As mentioned before, there is actually very little information about Xia Bai's battleship. There are only 2 sources of information for it. The first is the information and technology of the items involved in the battleship's manufacturing list, and the second is the battleship. Knowledge gained outside point without the input of knowledge. Alpha seems to be omnipotent, but in fact it is not proficient in everything, because without the support of relevant technologies, it has no way to complete the research and development of any relevant technologies. But if Zhang Yidong and the others can be allowed to come to the battleship, with Alpha's help, Zhang Yidong and the others may be able to advance their research at a greatly accelerated speed. And not only that, for Xia Bai, the battleship will also move from Zhang Yidong to the battleship. There they get what they have learned and knowledgeable, allowing Alpha to become an expert as well. In fact, Xia Bai had already had this idea. Inviting Zhang Yidong and the others over was just a small part of it. What Xia Bai really wanted to do was to share the vast amount of knowledge in various fields possessed by the military directly through Li Guangzhi's resource sharing, and input information into the battleship's system to enrich the battleship's knowledge base. At that moment, Xia Bai briefly introduced the laboratory of his battleship to Zhang Yidong. Although Xia Bai did not know much about these things, Xia Bai knew better than anyone that technology and knowledge meant power. So, when the battleship first arrived at the 6th level, he directly equipped the infrastructure in the laboratory with the highest configuration that a 6th level battleship could build. Everything involved in various fields was valuable, so Xia Bai he still had a certain impression. Now that he was naming the dishes one by one, Zhang Yidong's eyes lit up little by little. After Xia Bai finished speaking, Zhang Yidong said, "I will take people to Mr. Xia's battleship tonight." Xia Bai was startled by this guy's excitement and said, "This is not possible. My battleship is still in the process of being repaired. There is no use for you to go there now. Let's wait until my battleship is repaired. I'll come directly to pick you up." There was something in Zhang Yidong's eyes that made Xia Bai feel scared, and he nodded repeatedly. Okay. Xia Bai couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth, and Zhang Yidong's thoughts were actually written on his face. Xia Bai could clearly see that this guy seemed to want to study his own battleship more. But Xia Bai didn't say anything. If the situation was really as serious and bad as what the other party said, we must hurry up to find the purpose of the alien creatures and the location of the main valve, and shut down the entire atmospheric modification system. For Xia Bai, nothing is more important than this now. Next, he briefly said a few words to Academician Zhang, then stood up completely and prepared to leave. Zhang Yidong was very excited when he heard that he could go to the laboratory on Xia Bai's battleship. He was obviously much more enthusiastic about Xia Bai than before, and even took the initiative to take Xia Bai to visit their laboratory. Xia Bai was speechless for a while. He didn't know much about this aspect, so even if he visited, it would be meaningless after some polite refusal. Xia Bai took Yi Hanyu and left here. When they walked out and walked under the bright night sky, Xia Bai couldn't help but let out a long breath of relief. Yi Hanyu, who was standing next to him, glanced at him and joked with a smile, "You booked someone else's academician and the newly unearthed form factor core processor. Why do you seem to have been deceived by others?" Chapter 364. Are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere? Chapter 368. Are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere? Xia Bai walked around a lot outside. According to Zhao Jiangang's wishes, he originally wanted to take Xia Bai to live nearby, but Xia Bai had no intention of staying and turned back directly to the battleship in Shen City. It was already late at night, and the streets of Shenzhen were even colder, but at the far end of the city, the sound of gunfire that shocked the world could still be heard from a distance. Looking in that direction, the sky over there was also reflected in crimson. It was the troops in the coastal area who were fighting with the creatures coming from the sea. There was total silence in the car. Commander Xiang's bodyguards seemed to have become Xia Bai's bodyguards today, running around specifically for Xia Bai. They were still driving their cars and running tirelessly on the deserted streets. Xia Bai left Jing Xianggang and others behind where the manta ray aircraft was. He wanted to keep an eye on the core processing unit, but he didn't have many people around him. There was only one car at the moment, and apart from Zhao Jianggang, there were only Xia Bai and Yi Hanyu. There was total silence in the car. Xia Bai frowned more and more as he thought about the information he had received from Zhang Yidong before. The alien glacier battleship had been destroyed by him, but after going around like this today, Xia Bai suddenly felt that his situation seemed to have become more dangerous. This is not a good situation. Yi Hanyu, who was sitting in the back row with Xia Bai, was in a daze. She leaned against the window, supported her chin with her hand, and looked at Shenzhen with vehicles passing by at high speed outside, feeling a little regretful, whether it is before or after the apocalypse. This is her first time coming to the Magic City. She was born in a small city and grew up in a small city. She has been to the farthest place, which is Kyoto, and has never been there before. Magic City, but what she didn't expect was that it was the first time in her life that she came to Magic City. Before she could take a good look at this prosperous city, the city had already turned into this. There was darkness on both sides of the street. Yi Hanyu is also 20 this year, and even Xia Bai is aware of the changes in Yi Hanyu. Yi Hanyu herself felt that there were some changes in herself. Sometimes, she can't help but think about heavy things such as the things she heard today. She noticed Xia Bai's thoughtful and solemn expression sitting on the other side, and realized that he was probably worried about today's events. Yi Hanyu wanted to say something or discuss with Xia Bai, but she didn't know where to start. In the past, she was a person who didn't care about life and death. When the end of the world came, the old world collapsed, her parents ran away, and almost all her sisters died. At that time, she felt that life and even life had no meaning. Some people say that life is the greatest meaning, but Yi Hanyu is not that kind of person. Although she seems to be a problem girl, she is not a real bad boy. She just wants to attract attention. In her world, friends and relatives are more important than others. Everything must be important. Only when her relatives and friends are alive can the world seem to have meaning, because she does not think that a lonely existence has any meaning. Later, she came to Anyang Mountain. Over the past few years, her thoughts and concepts were quietly changing. Anyang Mountain seems to have become another home for her. Bailan, Xia Bai, they are like their own relatives. Yi Hanyu can't explain what it feels like, but she feels that if there is someone by your side who can make you feel relaxed and at ease, that may be important. Therefore, Yi Hanyu is also quietly changing. She is no longer fearless of death, but begins to sincerely want to help. No matter what it is, she doesn't care how the world changes or whether alien creatures will come, but she hopes that she live well with the people you care about and hope life can continue as before. There are not so many demanding people in this world, and the same is true in the apocalypse. Not everyone wants to dominate the world and be king in the apocalypse. For most people, the really important things are those that can make people feel something satisfying. But it's actually pretty good now, isn't it? Yi Hanyu narrowed her eyes slightly. She looked at the dark world outside. The corners of her mouth raised slightly. She turned her head and glanced at Xia Bai, who was sitting silently in the shadows on the other side. She thought for a moment. Now what he was thinking of was start a conversation and talk to Xia Bai about the information Zhang Yidong said today. Sometimes it can be very stressful for a person to think about something that is difficult to solve. But if someone can take the initiative to talk and share with him at this time, even if that person cannot make any valuable suggestions, it can relieve the other person's pressure. However, Yi Hanyu is really not good at persuading others. She has always been the kind of big sister level guy, that is, if you tell me what happened, I will go directly to deal with that kind of guy. So at this moment, she silently thought about how to speak for a long time. Moreover, this guy has been keeping a close eye on Xia Bai. Xia Bai quickly noticed the cold gaze coming from beside him. He raised his head in surprise and saw a pair of bright eyes. The light in the carriage was very dark, but Yi Hanyu's eyes were very bright. She was sitting on the other side of the back row opposite Xia Bai and was casting a burning gaze at Xia Bai. Xia Bai remembered that the last time the other party looked at him like this was many years ago when he wanted to sail a battleship to beg him. So now, Xia Bai shuddered and said, "What do you want to do, Yi?" Hanyu was even more confused by Xia Bai's cautionary words. She said hey and didn't say anything for a long time. She looked a little embarrassed on her face and instinctively avoided looking. Only then did Xia Bai realize that Yi Hanyu seemed a little unusual today. He frowned slightly, thought for a while, and said, "Are you feeling uncomfortable in any way?" With that said, Xia Bai directly raised his hand. to touch Yi Hanayu's forehead to see if the girl had a fever point, but tentacles are warm. Where does it feel like there is a fever? Xia Bai said, what's wrong with you? Are you okay? Did you suffer any injuries when the battleship crashed before? Yi Hanayu didn't expect that Xia Bai would come to her for a while, and she felt a little flustered inexplicably. As for this panic, Yi Hanayu suddenly felt a little confused. Why was she panicked, and what was she panicking about? She didn't look at Xia Bai, nor did she hear what Xia Bai was saying. She only felt that her body was slightly stiff. She instinctively turned her eyes away even more and looked out the window behind Xia Bai. Her expression was as if someone was outside. It was like something magical, but Yi Hanayu seemed to have completely forgotten that she could completely avoid Xia Bai by just turning her head. Please give me a genuine subscription if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World. It means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 365 Attack. Chapter 369 Attack. Yi Hanayu didn't expect that when she turned around, she actually saw something magical. It was a flash of light. The starting point of the flash was very far away and was not very bright. However, because Shensheng was too dark now, the flash of light seemed extremely clear and bright in the eyes of Yi Hanayu, who was an awakener. Then Yi Hanayu realized it was not something magical, but overflowing with murderous intent. Yi Hanayu changed color, and she rushed forward, throwing Xia Bai, who was still in shock, into the backseat of the car. Xia Bai rushed towards Yi Hanayu at that time, thinking that this girl would not suffer from any symptoms such as depression, epilepsy, and cerebral congestion due to the collision before. Therefore, he did not see the flash of light at all. When I fell down, what I was thinking in my head was, I'm going to go. Can't I really have epilepsy? But then, Xia Bai heard a harsh roar and explosion. A sniper bullet directly tore the glass of their military off-road car with bulletproof glass and smashed into the car. The special bulletproof glass was directly penetrated, and the glass at the perforation location cracked like spider webs. Looking at the location of the injection, if Yi Hanayu hadn't knocked Xia Bai down just now, Xia Bai might have died at this moment. This is Shanghai, and there are no intelligent zombies, so who would launch an attack in such a situation, with zombies in front and alien creatures behind, and the atmosphere modification system still not shut down? The sniper bullet penetrated the car, hit Yi Hanayu's waist, and penetrated the seat below, causing the cotton to burst out. Yi Hanayu let out a short exclamation, and Xia Bai immediately started bleeding from her waist. But Yi Hanayu was Yi Hanayu. She was not a delicate little girl. She didn't even look at her wounds except for her exclamation. She slapped Xia Bai on the head and pressed Xia Bai under her body again. Xiao Jiangang turned around and rushed to the front. The sniper is on the right. Xiao Jiangang was the squad leader of Commander Xiang's security squad. He didn't need Yi Hanayu to remind him. He realized the situation and reacted immediately. He turned the steering wheel and rushed to the left, trying to hide in another building, get behind the taller building, and get out of the sniper's visual range. But at this moment, a light suddenly lit up in a dark alley on the other side of their military off-road vehicle. That was when the car's high beams were turned on instantly, and a modified vehicle that had been waiting for a long time roared out of the car and crashed directly into the car where Xia Bai and the others were sitting from the side. Xiao Jiangang immediately turned the steering wheel to avoid it, but the two cars still collided in an instant. Xiao Jiangang moved a certain distance away, and the modified Chinese truck hit the front of Xiao Jiangang's car. In an instant, the car they were in was hit by the huge force and the force they had just carried. Under the action of kinetic energy, it flied above the ground in a swirl. Amidst the harsh friction sound on the ground, Xia Bai also heard a clear sharp roar. The sniper, who was at an unknown distance, opened fire again, but this shot was not fired in a deliberate manner. The vehicle was changing rapidly in mist, but it still whizzed past the roof of the car. Sparks flew out. At this moment, Xia Bai's car plunged into a store on one side of the street with a loud noise. This place seemed to be a jewelry store. The jewelry inside had long since disappeared, but there were fragile glass counters everywhere. It took a while before it finally stabilized. However, there seems to be an advantage to being knocked in here. At least you don't have to worry about the sniper judging from the angle and distance from which the opponent just fired. It would take a certain amount of time for the opponent to adjust to being able to hit the duel restore point, but Xia Bai couldn't be happy. The military vehicle was very strong, and it was not seriously deformed after such a collision. Moreover, Zhao Jiangang's last efforts just now did not allow the vehicle to turn over. However, at this moment, just after the car stabilized, he heard the heavy roar of the engine outside. The light shines in from outside the duel restore and is reflected by the broken glass on the floor, making the entire duel restore shine as brightly and dazzlingly as if it were made of gold. The modified Chinese truck outside was reversing, preparing to accelerate and hit him again. Your uncles. Xia Bai didn't forget to curse at this time. He glanced at Zhao Jiangang in the driver's seat in front. The airbag had been exposed. This guy's face was covered with blood, and he had fallen into a coma. At this moment, Yi Hanyu kicked open the slightly deformed carriage door and said, "Get off the car, quickly." She glanced at the modified car outside, gritted her teeth, stretched out her hand, and pulled Xia Bai out of the car. But at this moment, Xia Bai stretched out his hand, pressed Yi Hanyu's shoulder, and pulled the girl behind him. "It's too late. Lao Zhao is still inside. Ignore him." Yi Hanyu looked a little anxious, but she saw that Xia Bai, standing in front of her, took out a tube of injection and gave Xia Bai an injection without hesitation. That is the new gene enhancing potion produced by Xia Bai's battleship. Compared with the previous strengthening potion, it takes effect faster and lasts longer. The enhancement it can give people is far greater than before. What about the side effects? Xia Bai exhaled, threw the needle on the ground and crushed it, then pulled Yi Hanyu down behind him, and then took out another grenade-like device. That's not a grenade, but a handheld personal shield. He smiled at Yi Hanyu. "Don't worry, anyone who dares to touch me will die." Yi Hanyu was a little stunned. And at this moment, outside the duel restore, the engine from the Chinese-made car roared like a roar, and then it suddenly accelerated and roared over as it sprinted and approached at high speed. The flash from the high beam became brighter and brighter, and the entire duel restore was immersed in a brilliant flash. At this moment, Xia Bai was facing the car, neither dodging nor retreating. He just squatted down slightly, making a posture to welcome the impact, and then opened the energy shield, and the warm yellow light the shield rose in front of him, looking fragile and weak. Yi Hanyu, who was standing behind Xia Bai, opened her eyes wide. What she was thinking at the moment was, she couldn't go crazy. If Xia Bai went crazy, and she would try her best to push Xia Bai out of the impact range. Chapter 366. That's it. Chapter 370. That's all. Yi Hanyu made up her mind, but unfortunately, she failed in the end. Because Xia Bai seemed to have thought of something. He held the individual handheld shield in his hand with one hand, and stretched out his other hand directly to suppress Yi Hanyu behind him. Xia Bai's power was so amazing that Yi Hanyu found it impossible to resist. And it was at this moment that the Chinese truck crashed in like a missile, carrying an unparalleled impact, and was bound to kill Xia Bai and Yi Hanyu directly. 2 Living people, flesh and blood, even if they are awakened ones, it is impossible not to hit them to death, right? At this moment, on top of the modified Chinese truck, a ferocious and crazy smile appeared on the driver's face. It was the sneer of victory and death. The light shone, and a loud sound came from the space. The broken glass on the floor shook slightly. However, the modified Chinese car, that car that came with unparalleled kinetic energy, failed to crush those 2 people as expected. Because there was a man holding a shield of light as thin as a cicada's wings, and stopped the entire train. The entire front of the train was twisted and deformed, and the front glass was directly shattered, the powerful kinetic energy being blocked by them all. Xia Bai only took half a step back slightly amid the loud noise, half leaning on Yi Hanyu who was behind him. The arm of his right hand holding the personal shield had a slight opening, and blood flowed out. He glanced at the display interface of the shield, which showed that the energy consumption had reached 50%. But that's all. The genetic potion produced by the 6th level battleship is very powerful, which has made Xia Bai's physical fitness, strength and even physical strength far surpass the most powerful top awakener. In addition to not allowing Xia Bai to have any weird superpowers, all other indicators of the body are already at the level of little Superman. His body may still not be strong enough to directly block the opponent's collision, but with a shield as a buffer to absorb the impact, it is not impossible to block the collision head-on. Therefore, Xia Bai decided to intercept this attack for no reason. At this moment, the vehicle carrying unparalleled power was forced to stop, and the venue fell into a deathly silence. Yi Hanyu, who was standing behind Xia Bai, looked absolutely surprised. But in front of Xia Bai, the look on the driver's face of the successful vehicle, who just now had a decisive sneer on his face, had completely changed. It was as exciting as it was, and it contained the panic, as if seeing a ghost, as well as the look of disbelief and shock on the part of the annexer. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was completely stupid at this moment. He appeared here to intercept and kill Xia Bai. Of course he knew who Xia Bai was, and he was a professional himself, but the scene that appeared in front of him at this moment was completely contrary to the common sense he knew. Not even the awakened ones can withstand such a collision. He was stupid, but Xia Bai was not. The moment the impact was completed, he directly removed the shield, took out a gravity field grenade from his waist, and threw it directly into the opponent's car, accompanied by the gravity field. Suddenly, the entire front of the car was twisted and deformed, and the driver was instantly pressed into his position, unable to move. He could only watch as the deformed roof cracked inch by inch, and the twisted and sharp structure penetrated in his flesh and blood. At this moment, there was a loud noise in the compartment behind the truck. There were still many people in the compartment. At this moment, as the vehicle was forced to stop by Xia Bai, they also came out from behind the vehicle immediately. They were all soldiers armed to the teeth, with ordnance equipment, and carrying various weapons. He looked dignified and cold. But for them, Xia Bai only threw out 2 gravity field grenades with the degree of gravity amplified by Xia Bai's gravity field grenade. Even the most well-trained soldiers would not have any chance. They would be crushed in an instant and everyone would be controlled in the field. Xia Bai-chang said to Yi Hanyu, "There should be communication equipment in the car. Look for it, and ask our people or people from Zhejiang to come directly." As he said that, Xia Bai had already taken steps and walked forward. He raised the shield in his hand and rushed in the direction outside the jewelry store. Although he had solved the threat that was close at hand, it came from outside. Snipers are still a threat that cannot be ignored. But the sniper didn't fire again, and Xia Bai couldn't get closer to those people, suppressed by his gravity field grenades as he wanted, because as soon as he took a step, there was a sharp roar. The energy shield on top of him shook slightly. Xia Bai was silent for a moment, then retreated silently to Yi Hanyu, who was looking for communication equipment. Xia Bai left in a hurry. The battleship was being repaired again. Xia Bai basically didn't bring anything with him, and he didn't have any communication equipment with him. Yi Hanyu glanced at Xia Bai and said, "Why are you back?" Xia Bai rubbed his chin, thinking that if I said there was a sniper rifle wielder outside and scared me back, would my glorious image of blocking the truck just now be gone? This is not okay. Xia Bai thought for a while and said, "I'm afraid you can't find it." Yi Hanyu looked at Xia Bai in front of her with some suspicion. Xia Bai laughed a little guiltily, took out Zhejiang's gun from his waist, and then turned around. Anyway, those people out there have to be dealt with. The abnormal gravity field created by the gravity field grenade has a limited time. Once this group of people regains their ability to move, the firepower of this group of people can be said to be a huge threat to Xia Bai and Yi Hanyu. Moreover, Xia Bai he couldn't stand out, so he could only use his gun to kill them all. Xia Bai wanted to stay alive, but judging from the current situation, the risk involved in staying alive was a bit high. Xia Bai actually made some miscalculations today. He really didn't expect that at this juncture, someone would take such extreme measures when he died. The captain of the battleship was gone, and the opportunity came for those who wanted to get the battleship. Xia Bai knew that someone had been coveting his ship, but he didn't expect that the other party would take action so unscrupulously at such a time, in such a place, and under such circumstances. It doesn't matter if there is no one left alive. At this time of year, it should be difficult to find someone with such courage. Xia Bai slowly raised the muzzle of his gun, his eyes dark. Chapter 367 Who dares to touch the captain? Chapter 371 Who dares to touch the captain? People from the military and people from the Xia Bai battleship arrived almost at the same time. This dark and cold street instantly became lively, with people and vehicles of all kinds roaring in. The battleship even sent a group of drones hovering in the sky. After learning that there was a sniper here, it flew directly over and searched for the other party's presence like an ep. Xia Bai is not here, so Bailan is in charge of the battleship, and she has to show it. Whoever dares to touch Captain Xia Bai is seeking death. But when everyone entered the messy jewelry store, most people looked a little weird. Because the situation in the jewelry store is simply weird. The two cars inside occupied half of the space of the jewelry store. At the front entrance of the jewelry store, they were all armed with dead people lying around. The front of the car, that had been modified, was twisted and deformed. It was like it hit an iron plate, and looking at the direction of the truck, it seemed that it was crashing into the military off-road vehicle. However, there were almost no signs of impact on the military off-road vehicle. Although everyone felt strange, Xia Bai didn't say anything, and it was impossible for anyone to ask anything. The unlucky guy Zhao Jiangan was also carried out immediately. This guy's face seemed to be covered in blood, but in fact he was not injured. He just fell into a coma. He was carried out immediately. On the other side, Bailan, who had already arrived at the scene, was treating Yi Hanayu's injuries. The power of the sniper bullet should not be underestimated. The shot grazed Yi Hanayu's waist and also tore a big hole in Yi Hanayu's body. However, Bailan didn't seem to have any intention of saying anything to Xia Bai. Bailan is expressing dissatisfaction with Xia Bai in this way at the moment. Bailan's dissatisfaction also has its roots. Xia Bai sent all the people he led to the manned aircraft, and he ran around everywhere, causing others to intercept him halfway. This kind of mindless behavior certainly made Bailan a little bit annoyed. Xia Bai felt sorry for himself and was too embarrassed to go and say something to Bailan. But Xia Bai really didn't expect that someone would attack him so openly at this juncture. The military security platoons patrolling here came over, but their commanders kept a tight lid on the situation. Xia Bai could tell that when the other party saw the scattered corpses on the ground. He seemed to have guessed who they were, but he didn't say anything or make any expression. He just saw the world in front of him. Xia Bai also chatted with him for a few words, but he also kept secrets and remained silent. Xia Bai said, I think it should not be difficult to find out who these people are and who they belong to. The platoon leader was silent and said, Mr. What he said was impeccable. Xia Bai just smiled and didn't go any further. He knew that the other party might also be afraid of being involved. This is the principle of this world. People below can never touch the things on the upper level. Don't dare touch the things above. It's not that the other party doesn't want to say it, it's that he doesn't dare to say it. Of course Xia Bai would not ask again. But no matter what, this matter will never end here today. People came to the door with guns drawn. How could Xia Bai make things easier for him? And at this point in time, with so many things happening in the world in danger, there is still someone who wants to kill him and steal his battleship. Xia Bai stood outside the messy jewelry store, squinting his eyes and looking into the distance. What he saw was still a dark world. If there is a book, it will be long. If there is no book, it will be short. Xia Bai's drone also failed to find the sniper. The other party may have left early when it was confirmed that the target could not be killed. Xia Bai did not take any immediate action. He directly led people to withdraw to the location of his warship. When Xia Bai came back, he discovered that Secretary Wu and others seemed to have evacuated early. In just one night, all the non-battleship personnel here had already evacuated. It seemed that they had completely given up on fighting with the world. Battle of Battleships. Seeing this, Xia Bai didn't say anything, but settled directly at the temporary camp outside the battleship. As the captain, Xia Bai found that he had an independent room, called a room. It was actually a wooden house built on the ruins of the battleship. The completion of this place was actually due to Secretary Wu and others. They have plenty of manpower there. On the first day after the Xia Bai battleship landed, they built a lot of things around the battleship. They were obviously ready to fight here for a long time. However, now that they have withdrawn, they will remain here. It's for Xia Bai's people. Xia Bai entered his room in front of him, and Bailan came in behind him. Bailan looked at Xia Bai, sighed slightly, and said, "Are you okay?" Xia Bai said, "Except for the mild concussion diagnosed before, there should be nothing wrong." He sat down in the corner of the room. Actually, he didn't want to see Xia Bai at the moment, because according to time, the effect time of his gene enhancing potion was about to end. In other words, the side effects were about to come. Xia Bai still remembers the lightness he felt the last time he had side effects and a bunch of nonsense that came out of his mouth without knowing why. But Xia Bai still breathed out and said, "Do you have any thoughts about today's matter, Bai?" Lan smiled and said, "We don't know what's going on in Shenzhen, right? But I think 80% of it is Secretary Wu and the people behind her. They wanted our ship so much before, but now they can do it so easily by giving this place away. Isn't it just to make us relax our vigilance and have other thoughts? Moreover, now that Xiang Commander Li Guangji has expressed his support for us, who else can he still have the confidence to deal with us? Furthermore, I heard from Yi Hanayu before that Secretary Wu's boss is a man named Liu Kiwei, a high-ranking official who can speak to both the military and the government. It is said that once Li Guangji dies, he will be the most likely to take over the entire Shenzhen war zone. People." Xia Bai glanced at her and said with some surprise, "Where did Yi Hanayu find out about this, Bai?" Lan smiled. Of course she pried it out of Secretary Wu's mouth. "Before you woke up, she didn't leave here. With the help from Commander Xiang, she kept fighting with Secretary Wu, although there was nothing obvious results. But we can always get some information, and on that day, these were not secrets." Chapter 368 Repair completed. Chapter 372 Repair completed. Xia Bai nodded slightly and said, "I will confirm with Li Guangji later. Even if we want to find someone to take revenge, we should not find the wrong person, Bai." Lan smiled and said, "You really haven't changed at all after so many years." Xia Bai said, "Of course, this matter cannot be tolerated, but it is not that important. We have more important things to do. Gather our people again, and prepare them to return to their posts in the battleship, and then it's best to investigate each case one by one." Bailan frowned and said, "This is..." Xia Bai glanced at him and said, "Before we came from Anyang Mountain, these people were all from Anyang Mountain and all my people. But now that the battleship has fallen, these people have also fallen into Shen City. It is possible to become a Shenzhen person, maybe. They won't have any other thoughts or ideas, but we have to make sure that we are truly monolithic." Today's battle was a wake-up call for him. He had to be more cautious and cautious. Bailan nodded slightly, thought for a while and said, "Then I'm leaving." Xia Bai nodded. At this moment, he felt a sense of powerlessness coming over him, and his head felt dizzy. He did not try to hold Bailan back. Bailan opened the door and was about to leave, but she took a slight step and then stopped. She was half leaning against the door, turned to look at Xia Bai in the room, and said with a hesitant expression, "You." Xia Bai was stunned for a moment, then said something out of nowhere, "Well, do you want to stay tonight, Bai?" Lang was stunned and didn't know where he was thinking. Two blushes quickly appeared on his face and he said, "You drank fake wine, right?" After saying these words, Bailan completely turned his head and left. The door was blown by the wind and slowly closed. Xia Bai sat silently for a moment and slapped himself silently. A night of silence. When Xia Bai woke up the next day, he didn't openly investigate what happened last night, but took action again. Xia Bai still has too many things to do. Before upgrading the battleship, he must first obtain all the information he needs. When the battleship takes off again, he must first locate the master valve of the alien creature's atmospheric transformation system on the Earth. Where you are, shut down this thing first, and then upgrade the battleship. The time required to upgrade from level 6 battleship to level 7 is much longer than that from level 5 to level 6. Moreover, although the 10 million energy points in Xia Bai's hand are enough for one upgrade, the energy for related construction after the upgrade still not enough points. However, Xia Bai also had a good idea point, that is to go to the ocean, to accumulate energy points with the power that his current 6th level battleship possesses. It shouldn't be a problem to go deep into the depths of the Pacific to hunt zombies. The ocean is full of extreme mutants, and the number of energy points each can provide to Xia Bai's battleship is unimaginable. Moreover, the creatures in the ocean are no less than those on land, and as a completely occupied area, the size of the tide of corpses in the ocean may even be more dense. In that case, wouldn't it be possible to reach out and fish it out, and it would be full of energy points? Xia Bai felt that the time for him to level up quickly was finally coming. Moreover, the next day, Xia Bai also received a message from Li Guangji. Li Guangji said that someone from the United States wanted to see Xia Bai. This is also unexpected and reasonable point, since Leo Medi had paid attention to the situation here as early as the day of the war. He should have seen the whole process of the war that day. It is normal for him to want to get in touch with Xia Bai, the captain of the battleship. But as it stands now, the meeting between Leo Medi and Xia Bai is basically just a video call, set up through satellite communication. However, although he knew that Leo Medi wanted to see him, Xia Bai had no intention of meeting them. Are you kidding? I'm the captain of a battleship. How can you see me if you want? Having said that, Xia Bai's idea is indeed like this. Whoever puts down his posture first means that whoever will take the initiative in future exchanges. Of course, what Xia Bai hopes to see more is that he will never have to negotiate with the top leaders of any country. It is not known that it may be the best situation for him to solve the trouble by himself and his warships alone. If his battleship doesn't work either, then there's probably no point in communicating anymore. In the next 2 days, Xia Bai could be said to have been running around Shanghai. However, the situation in Shanghai was actually not good. It was receiving attacks from zombies from all directions, and it also needed to alleviate the huge pressure on survivors. Just 3 days later, Xia Bai's battleship was finally repaired. The behemoth once again rose into the sky from the bank of the Pujiang River, casting a huge shadow over Shen City. This scene made everyone in Shanghai who could see the battleship look sideways, with expressions of disbelief on their faces. Everyone has seen the tragic scene of Xia Bai's battleship falling from the sky before, but what no one could have imagined is that this battleship could rise into the sky again in such a short period of time. This is simply unbelievable. Especially those who had seen the tragic situation of the battleship with their own eyes before, and even evaluated the damaged condition of the battleship. When they saw this scene, their expressions changed suddenly. They couldn't believe that a battleship that was damaged to that extent could be used like this in such a short period of time. An attitude that is almost as good as new rises into the sky. This is simply impossible. But, no matter how many people find it incredible, Xia Bai's battleship once again soared in the sky of Shanghai on this day, and on this day, there was no longer a powerful glacier battleship standing in front of Xia Bai's battleship. Under the gaze and attention of countless people, Xia Bai's battleship adjusted the direction of the battleship. As soon as it took off, Xia Bai immediately connected to the communication in the hatching area and said, "You just said, where does that guy named Liao Kiwi live now?" In the past 3 days, Xia Bai has basically confirmed that the force that launched the attack on him was the force represented by this guy named Liao Kiwi. Therefore, his behavior has always been unscrupulous. Even Li Guangji also you have to give in to him a little bit. But in Xia Bai's dictionary, there are no two concepts, local snake and giving in. For Xia Bai, if you can't beat me and still want to dance with me, that's asking for death. Chapter 369 He even dares to fight aliens. Chapter 373 He even dares to fight aliens. When Xia Bai's battleship took off, Liao Kiwi was having breakfast with Secretary Wu. He lives in a luxurious villa area on the outskirts of Shenzhen. It is quite a distance from the main battlefield of the Shenzhen War, and there are basically no people here. After the end of the world, it was even classified as a villa by Liao Kiwi's personal order. In high-rise residential areas, no one without some status and influence can even think of living here. Therefore, this place is also very clean. Even now when many survivors can only sleep on the ground, this place seems even more clean. Liao Kiwi likes this kind of purity born from power. Not only does it feel comfortable to him, but it also easily satisfies his vanity. He is the top person in the entire Shenzhen war zone, and naturally his life is much better than those ordinary people. Therefore, his breakfast is much better than that of ordinary survivors. Many survivors can't even eat breakfast. His breakfast consists of a glass of soy milk and a sandwich with ham. For Liao Kiwi, this was an ordinary morning. And it was also an ordinary morning when Xia Bai's battleship slowly rose into the sky at the far end of Shen City and attracted the attention of countless eyes. He was talking to Secretary Wu, talking about the decisive battle against Xia Bai many days ago. Liao Kiwi said, "What a bunch of rubbish. More than a dozen people can't even handle a single Xia Bai." Secretary Wu glanced at him and pursed her lips. She was really beautiful. Even if she wore light makeup, she still had a soul-stirring and alluring feeling that made people want to pick her up and take a bite. "I heard he said that he was secretly investigating us, and he probably already knew that it was us." Liao Kiwi said, "Sweetheart, don't worry. What can he do if he knows? His battleship is now a pile of scrap metal by the Pujiang River. Who takes him seriously except himself? And he won't live much longer." Secretary Wu was slightly surprised and said, "What do you mean?" Liao Kiwi said, "I heard that he hasn't been more careful recently. He always has a lot of guards around him. Next time I will just ask Commander Wu to drive a tank and kill them right at the feet of their battleship." Kill. There are only 100 good people in total. Without the boat, aren't they just clowns? He felt that what he said was very domineering, so he took another sip of soy milk very domineeringly, raised his head slightly, and looked at Secretary Wu in front of him, wanting to show off the face of this woman who was at least 15 years younger than him. Find the look of admiration or you want to see point. But he only saw a look of fear on Secretary Wu's face. And this fearful look didn't seem to be revealed because of Liao Kiwi's words just now. In fact, Secretary Wu was looking outside at this moment. They are sitting in the restaurant on the first floor of the villa, with their backs against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and outside are the small garden and swimming pool. At the dining table, Secretary Wu and Liao Kiwi are sitting opposite each other. Liao Kiwi has his back to the glass, but Secretary Wu, as you can see the outside scene through the floor-to-ceiling windows at this moment. Secretary Wu was looking out the window with an extremely frightened expression, so much so that her pretty little face was slightly distorted. But what's surprising is that even though her facial features are distorted with fear, she still looks very beautiful and interesting now. Maybe this is someone who can truly be called beautiful. At this moment, Liao Kiwi suddenly heard some kind of huge buzzing sound. The soy milk cups on his table vibrated slightly, and the half cup of soy milk left in them shook uneasily, as if they were also afraid of something. At this moment, Liao Kiwi realized something. He stood up and turned around to look outside. A large shadow was coming from a distance. That's the shadow cast by the battleship. In the sky, a huge warship was slowly flying from the distant sky. Although it was said to be flying slowly, it was only due to the visual difference caused by the huge size of the battleship. In fact, within a few seconds of Liao Kiwi seeing it, it had already completely arrived above the villa. The battleship blocking out the sunlight above the villa, it cast a huge shadow. Liao Kiwi just said that Xia Bai's battleship had already turned into scrap metal and could not fly. However, now, it flew above Liao Kiwi's head. Secretary Wu stood behind Liao Kiwi and said tremblingly, Liao. She was a little scared. She thought of Xia Bai's arrogance in Yaodong building, and the scene of Xia Bai's deadly battle with alien creatures in the sky above Shen City, and she became even more frightened. Liao Kiwi stood up straight. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass window, with his hands behind his back, looking up at the battleship above his head like some great general. At this moment, he actually showed some amazing courage. Without looking back, he said, "Why are you panicking?" Panicked? That man named Xia Bai would never dare to open fire. Who am I? He dared to kill me because he didn't want to hang out in Shen City. However, it was just right for them to open this scrap metal ship. Come, if I can take over, Secretary. Wu felt that what Liao Qiwei said made sense. Liao Qiwei was a big shot in Shanghai, and the whole city would be shaken when he stomped his feet. But Secretary Wu changed his mind, but felt something was wrong again. He even dares to fight aliens. Secretary. Wu was too nervous and panicked. He only said half of this sentence, but the meaning was already very clear. They even dare to fight aliens, so why don't they dare to beat you? For some reason, after Secretary Wu said this, he suddenly noticed that the body of Liao Qiwei, who was so powerful just now, suddenly became a little smaller, as if a balloon had been popped. At the same moment, Xia Bai's battleship was receiving various warnings. Some said that Xia Bai had entered the military warning zone. Some said that Xia Bai was taking extreme terrorist measures. Some persuaded Xia Bai not to act arbitrarily, and some even said that Xia Bai was breaking the law. These warnings came from various fields, including those from the real Shenzhen Defense Department, senior officials from the military, the government, representatives of major forces among the survivors, and even Li Guangji urgently contacted Xia Bai in the ward. Seeing Xia Bai, he said anxiously, I know what Liao Qiwei did before, but your current method is definitely not a good method. Xia Bai, don't act rashly, we can take other methods. Xia Bai glanced at him and said, my battleship has been repaired, and the medical cabin is ready for use. I can cure your tumor. Li Guangji was silent for a long time because of these words. Then he glanced silently and shouted, Nurse Li, the signal is not good. Then the screen flashed slightly, and the call was unilaterally interrupted. This Liao Qiwei is really an influential guy, and Li Guangji would find such a lame excuse to leave. Chapter 370. We are anxious today. Chapter 374. We are anxious today. Even Li Guangji couldn't stop Xia Bai, and of course it was impossible for others as Li Guangji went offline. Xia Bai also exhaled slightly, glanced at the villa below, and after thinking for a moment, said, we are in a hurry today, so just give him a missile. Xia Bai said these words lightly, but the strength of the missile was cold and powerful. Under the frightened eyes of countless people far and near, Xia Bai's battleship launched a missile directly from the sky, hitting the building below. In an instant, there was an earth-shaking loud explosion, and the entire building was instantly engulfed in flames. It collapsed amid the rising smoke and explosion, taking with it the flowers, trees, and small swimming pool in the backyard, being swallowed up. After completing all this, Xia Bai's battleship slowly turned in the sky, readjusted its direction like a proud giant beast, and flew to the other end of the sky. From the beginning to the end, except for a few brief words to Li Guangji, Xia Bai didn't reply to anyone else's persuasion. And as this place was blown up to the sky by Xia Bai's cannon, the faces of the big guys who were currently in various locations in Shenzhen, even Hecheng area, looked a little ugly. At this moment, they all realized that Xia Bai was a completely different person. People who follow the rules and don't even want to follow the rules, but they could only remain silent. This is a lunatic who dares to fight aliens in a battleship and knock them down from the sky. He still holds a battleship in his hand. How can they express their dissatisfaction? If you make someone unhappy, won't you end up like Liao Qiwei? It is really a headache for a guy who doesn't play by the rules and has strong power and backing to appear in an inherent system. At this time, some people had even begun to think about their previous sins against Xia Bai. While many people were feeling depressed and anxious, Xia Bai was paying attention to something else, something really important. Xia Bai's eyes moved down slightly. More than 900,000 energy points were not wasted. In 3 days, the battleship has been completely repaired from the inside out. There is no trace of such serious trauma. It was dark before. The brightly lit state has already been restored in the bridge. At this moment, Xia Bai was looking at the interface on the platform in front of him. Just now, the battleship's radar system discovered the location of a cluster of large energy points. That is, there is a place in Shenzhen with a large number of energy points. This is something Xia Bai has never seen before. Ever since he obtained the battleship, there has been only one way to obtain energy points, which is to hunt zombies and destroy other things. This is the first time he has seen energy points gathered in the open air. It felt a little unusual. 2 seconds ago, Alpha also completely confirmed the location of the energy point gathering area. Coincidentally, it was the location of the laboratory along the Pujiang River, where the Glacier battleship fell from the sky and first launched an attack on Shenzhen. The place had long been turned into ruins. The two main gun bombardments of the Glacier battleship were like someone slashing two knives from the sky. The entire area was cut open like a cross. The center position even triggered a chain of explosions and destruction. Xia Bai had been there personally, and it was already in ruins moreover. After all, that was the location where the Glacier battleship first landed. Xia Bai had also specially investigated in the past few days. The laboratory had been dug down to 7 levels, and the main research there was not technology, but a settlement site for an unknown life form. That's right, it's an unknown life form. Xia Bai learned about it from the information provided by the military. That thing fell into the earth in 1999, which was the year when the legendary Terror Lord came. However, this thing was not the Terror Lord. It was not aggressive. From 1999 to now, it has never been. Can communicate with humans in any situation. Military scientists call it Xiaoguang. In the image data, Xia Bai saw the appearance of this thing. It was glowing light. It was really light. It was composed of a colorful line of light that could be cleaned and distinguished. It was a lump-like condensation in the air, like it was like a large group of aquatic plants in the sea, swaying slightly. According to records, from 1999 to the outbreak of the apocalypse in 2018, this thing was like some kind of space aquatic plant, and did not show any purpose, behavior, intelligence and even aggression. But in fact, Xiaoguang came to the earth in a spaceship. That spaceship was not a spaceship in the conventional sense. It was also a ray of light similar to Xiaoguang. When it fell, military scientists once thought that Xiaoguang was a spaceship or a spaceship. However, as time goes by, the military believes that Xiaoguang and the spacecraft may be some kind of space plants that have no specific meaning and do not possess civilization or wisdom. It wasn't until the end of the world that this thing showed an unusual state. According to the relevant information that Xia Bai browsed, behavioral experts classified the abnormal state displayed by Xiaoguang at that time as panic. It panicked. Then it launched some kind of abnormal fluctuation state. It was this state that affected the zombie mutation of humans, and further made the extreme mutants around Shenzhen, especially those coming from the ocean direction, daunted. This was also when Xia Bai came to Shenzhen, and saw that Shenzhen's recovery was so good. At this time, people redefined Xiaoguang as a living thing, but unfortunately, people were still unable to communicate with it in any form, let alone any other deeper information. Interaction. But Xiaoguang showed no resistance to human behavior. The military moved it all the way back from the experimental center outside Shanghai City and directly moved it to Shanghai City. It did not show any resistance. Until this year, on May 11th. 2022, the Glacier battleship descended from the sky, directly ran over the entire place with a terrifying blow, and completely blew the laboratory, where the thing was located, into ruins. The purpose of that Glacier warship coming to Shenzhen seems to be the Xiaoguang hidden by humans in the military's detection. Xiaoguang has disappeared, but they are still digging hard these days, trying to find something related to it. Chapter 371 Xiaoguang. Chapter 375. Xiaoguang. The location of the energy point agglomeration marked by Alpha seems to be at the location of the ruins of the previous laboratory used to hide the rays of light. Xia Bai didn't hesitate and flew over with the battleship. It only took 30 seconds for his warship to run from Hechen to Shenzhen. Now it was no problem in Shenzhen. In the blink of an eye, his battleship had already arrived at the ruins. Xia Bai looked down from the sky and could see a messy land. On that land, personnel organized by the military were cleaning up the ruins. A 7-story underground structure here has been shot through. If we want to dig out the results, it will take at least a week with the current manpower. But now, the arrival of Xia Bai's battleship means that the construction period will be greatly shortened. Xia Bai directly issued an order for the people below to evacuate. Of course, in this case, his words are still not that useful. The people here are basically people from the military or survivors or engineers who have an employment relationship with the military. To the people in the military, Xia Bai's battleship is amazing, but they can't just leave behind their mission. and for many survivors, they came here and operated various instruments because the military would pay them remuneration, and they were even less willing to leave. Xia Bai had already anticipated this situation, so he called Li Guangji directly. Although Li Guangji received a guarantee from Xia Bai that he could sit back and watch Xia Bai blow up Liu Qiwei to death, because strictly speaking, Liu Qiwei's death would be good for him. But he could not really allow Xia Bai to do whatever he wanted. Therefore, after learning about Xia Bai's request, he carefully asked Xia Bai what he wanted to do before he was willing to help Xia Bai. Xia Bai is not an unreasonable person. Everyone has their own difficulties. If you want a system to operate normally and efficiently, you cannot ignore his rules. Of course, for Xia Bai, the person who offended him, just forget about it. What Xia Bai wanted to do was also very simple. After the military personnel and survivors temporarily withdrew from the area with a lot of equipment, the tractor beam tower on Xia Bai's battleship began to work. However, this time, Xia Bai did not want to pull the ruins into his battleship, but let the tractor beam tower play the role of transportation, pulling the ruins from the ground and moving them to other locations. The power of the tractor beam tower of the 6th level battleship is astonishing. As long as the battleship is here and under the continuous output power, it is only a matter of time before the ruins here are completely removed. Xia Bai has two main goals. The first, of course, is the energy points. According to Alpha, a lump-like energy accumulation of this size that can be detected by a battleship means that the number of energy points will definitely not be small. At least there are millions of points. Xia Bai also believed in this. After all, his 5 million energy points are only 2 drops, and 10 million are just a small amount. And secondly, for an on-main reason, Xia Bai also wanted to see if he could find any remains of Xia Guang here and really see alien creatures. Perhaps the military could not have any exchanges and communication with Xia Guang, but Xia Bai's battleship may not be able to do this. But it still took Xia Bai a lot of time to actually dig this place out. In the afternoon, Xia Bai completely dug up the place and dug out a huge pit. But Xia Bai didn't find the energy point he dreamed of, but found Xia Guang. After 2 rounds of main gun bombardment by the Glacier battleship, even the Glacier battleship thought it had been destroyed, but in fact, it was still alive. It's under layers of ruins. From the most intuitive perspective, this thing was even more amazing and beautiful than the pictures and videos Xia Bai had seen before. It was like a lantern work of art. It is composed of streaks of light, colorful, spiraling and nodular. When it is in the ruins, it spreads along the ruins, and when Xia Bai dug up the ruins, its main structure spread out. It was gathered back like a mimosa and gathered up again. Moreover, the tractor beam tower has no reaction to this thing. Xia Bai frowned slightly and said, "Didn't the military say it is dead?" Xia Bai's question was not groundless. The military had scanned and searched this area before, and it was confirmed at that time that Xia Guang and its spaceship were all in an undetectable state of disappearance. In addition, at that time, the situation in which the Glacier battleship ended its attack after 2 cannons made it almost certain that this thing should have been destroyed. Moreover, Xia Bai had just scanned the battleship and found nothing except energy points. Alpha responded to Xia Bai's question immediately as always. "Dear Captain, it may have entered some kind of stealth state, blocking detection from the outside world. So neither we nor the Glacier battleship can detect it. It exists." Xia Bai frowned slightly and said, "Do you mean it hid and pretended to be dead?" Alpha said, "This can be understood in human terms." Xia Bai couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth and said, "Then it was killed on the spot." Alpha said, "It is likely to have lost or does not have the ability to act independently. There is no detailed information related to the current creature in the battleship database, so it is impossible to give more specific and accurate speculations and judgments." Xia Bai found it a little incredible. How could such a ball of colorful light not have the ability to act independently? Not to mention the more advanced ones, like octopuses that use light threads to swim in the air, and the more advanced ones. As a ray body, it can completely rely on light transmission to perform some kind of instantaneous displacement on the spatial level. Xia Bai took the back of his head I can think of several of them, which makes me feel more and more incredible. Immediately afterwards, Alpha said, "Dear Captain, what can be confirmed now is that it is the location of the energy point cluster that our ship just scanned and confirmed. Its energy points are in a state of dissipation. This dissipation the state was detected by our ship, exposing its existence and disguise, and the reason why it is in this dissipated state is probably because it is injured. Xia Guang was injured. No blood, but energy points. At this moment, I don't know what Xia Bai was thinking. His eyes suddenly became bright, as if he had seen the vault. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 372 Accept It All. Chapter 376 Accept It All. Xia Bai thought, Alpha, you are saying that this thing is a clump of energy points, and it can fly out energy points when it is injured. Does that mean that this thing is a living energy point? Sorry dear Captain, I can't define what a living energy point is. Alpha's response was as unpleasant as ever, but Captain, both of your guesses are accurate. Therefore, although I can't understand what you mean, that's a conclusion. But theoretically, your conclusion may be right. Xia Bai, aside from your intelligence in flattering, I'm afraid you are not a fake AI. Alpha said very seriously, thank you for the compliment, dear Captain. Yi Hanayu in front couldn't hold back and burst out laughing. The corners of Xia Bai's mouth couldn't help but twitch. And Alpha is responding seriously again. The current life form and life status of the creature are unknown. The database downloaded from the military does not contain valid and accurate information. We can first conduct a risk assessment of the creature and then put it into place. Put it into the battleship for analysis. Xia Bai stared at the beautiful light creature in the picture and said, what if I kill it? Will I get a bunch of energy points? Alpha said, the current biological life form is unknown. The strength of civilization is unknown. The degree of intelligence is unknown. And whether it is aggressive. Dear Captain, we do not recommend that you launch any risky attacks. This thing landed on the Earth in 1999. Xia Bai really didn't think this thing was dangerous. Moreover, the 2 rounds of bombardment by the Glacier battleship failed to make it take any violent countermeasures, and it shouldn't be possible now. What kind of offensive methods are used? However, initiating violent measures now does not seem to be a good choice because just now Xia Bai had promised Li Guangji that no matter what the situation was, it would be handled by the military first. Moreover, this may be the real and only living alien creature Xia Bai has seen on the Earth. Although the other person's state is different from what Xia Bai imagined, and even seems a bit exaggerated, it is different from Xia Bai's imagination. Compared with energy points, Xia Bai still hopes to obtain some useful information from the other party. For example, how it keeps zombies away from Shanghai, and even significantly reduces the virus infection rate in Shanghai. Still got more. Xia Bai knew nothing about the starry sky. He was on Earth and knew nothing about the sea of stars, let alone what happened and why the Earth became a target. It's already impossible to do anything about it, but if we can get some information from this thing, that would definitely be the best. From the perspective of the starry sky, the Earth is like a small ancient well in a corner of a continent. Human beings are in the ancient well and know the existence of the outside world, but they do not know what the outside world is like. If relevant information can be obtained from Xia Guang, the help to Xia Bai may be far greater than the energy points he can obtain by killing this thing. Therefore, Xia Bai just talked and was surprised at the moment, but did not really take any action. Moreover, Xia Bai also followed the agreement between himself and Li Guangji. After figuring out what was down here, he turned around and left. He handed this place over to the military first and waited for the military to deal with it first before he came to see the situation. Then Xia Bai went straight to the location of the main control unit that was removed from the Manta Ray aircraft. Jing Xiangyang had been guarding this thing for the past few days. when Xia Bai came over, although the scientific researchers here didn't want to yes, but the shot that Xia Bai gave Liu Qiwei today can be said to have made him completely famous. When he heard that Xia Bai wanted this thing, he handed it over happily. No matter how reluctant he was, Xia Bai also took away the military's existing research data and gave it to Alpha so that it could try to decipher the information and programs through the battleship's computer. After that, Xia Bai did not forget about Zhang Yidong and took him with him. He went straight to the battleship and picked up the academician and his staff point. After bringing them into the battleship, Xia Bai was very considerate and asked Ji Hanyu to lead them around the battleship point. Of course, it was said that Ji Hanyu would take him to visit, but in fact, he still had to watch them and not let them cause any trouble in the negotiation in the battleship point. In Xia Bai's opinion, there is no better candidate than Ji Hanyu. Zhang Yidong is an upright guy, while Ji Hanyu is completely arrogant and unreasonable. No one can do anything to the other, but Zhang Yidong is in Xia Bai's battleship, so he can only waiting honestly. After completing these two things, Xia Bai exhaled and then thought of Li Guangji. He drove the battleship to the hospital again and took Li Guangji out. On this day, Xia Bai's warships began to go back and forth between Shenzhen and Heching, acting quite arrogantly. Of course, this was something Li Guangji tacitly approved of. Moreover, although Xia Bai's warships moved quickly, Li Guangji was still able to get the first in time. We will know where Xia Bai appears and what he is doing. Moreover, this time, Li Guangji also brought a group of guards onto the battleship and said to Xia Bai, "Anyway, you brought a lot of people and a lot of key things with you. Although we are now considered to be the same human beings, Angle shares resources, but I always have to keep those things safe, right?" Xia Bai thought, "You have already brought people up, what else can I say?" Although Xia Bai was a little dissatisfied with what he said, he knew that it was what he meant. If the military could really be so reassured about Xia Bai, something strange would have happened. Moreover, Li Guangji seemed to be very confident that Xia Bai could cure him. Judging from the content and perspective of his current conversation with Xia Bai, he no longer had the same trusting feeling when talking to Xia Bai before. Instead, he seemed to be doing something for him, making plans for the future. Xia Bai didn't say anything. Li Guangji had given him enough faith and trust, so he couldn't go too far. The principle is like this: if someone gives you a point, you must also know how to give in. Otherwise, if someone takes a step back, you will take a step forward. In the end, it will only end on bad terms, and no cooperation will be achieved. Xia Bai welcomed Li Guangji and sent him to the medical room. The medical staff in the battleship were in charge, and Alpha coordinated calculations and mobilized resources to perform the first surgery using medical nanorobots in the battleship. Chapter 373 Above the Pacific Ocean. Chapter 377 Above the Pacific Ocean. Xia Bai's battleship hovered over Shenzhen and Heching, and the buzzing roar echoed above the heads of everyone in the area. Almost everyone knew that Xia Bai's battleship had risen again. At nightfall, after Xia Bai had finished handling everything, he drove the battleship and flew into the ocean. He hovered over the sea more than 10 kilometers away from the coastline of Shenzhen and began to pour firepower into the ocean, hunting kill the extreme mutants wandering in the ocean. Although Xia Bai's current battleship can be described as rich and has more than 10 million energy points, this is still not enough for Xia Bai. Now that the battleship is repaired, Xia Bai must seize the time to hunt zombies again with upgrades. Time is running out. But now when hunting zombies, we can no longer be as arrogant and unscrupulous as before. Xia Bai's battleship now also functions as a medical facility and a scientific research ship. The laboratory and medical room are operating at full capacity. If Xia Bai has a big shock at this time and plunges into the ocean, he will be out of control. It's a big deal. But it's enough above sea level. His battleship hovered about 300 meters above the sea, and various weapons fired wildly. Before the repair of the battleship was completed, Xia Bai had come to this coastline to inspect it. In just a few days, this place had attracted an immeasurable number of extreme mutants. The smell of guns and blood was overwhelming. These things surged crazily from the depths of the sea, filling the entire sea area, straining the military forces in the coastal areas, and putting great pressure on them. At this moment, looking down from Xia Bai's battleship, one can see the figures of those shocking and terrifying creatures in the rough ocean, like a large school of fish passing through the ocean. But compared with schools of fish, these things are much more terrifying. The firepower pouring from the battleships formed a dazzling strike network. The soldiers far away on the coastline of Shenzhen could clearly see that in this direction, in the dark sky and sea, a vertical line of light was shining. The light that penetrated the sky and the earth shot out from the position of the battleship in the sky and penetrated straight into the sea below, illuminating the entire ocean. This is quite a shocking scene. At this moment, Xia Bai in the battleship was preparing to go to bed. He's been running around everywhere these days, and it's time to take a good rest. In the next period of time, Xia Bai plans to temporarily park the battleship here. In any case, the most important thing is to solve the most critical issue first and let Zhang Yiden find the main valve of the alien atmosphere modification system as quickly as possible. If you want to confront someone, you have to first figure out what the other person wants to do, right? Moreover, the atmosphere modification system is like a slow poison, destroying life on Earth bit by bit. In addition, the battleships also need to be replenished with new personnel, and the members of the fighter formations also need to be replenished. To replenish manpower, it is best to return to Anyang Mountain. Xia Bai does not dare to use people from other power systems now. The political situation in the battleship must be stable. This is a top priority. Such a little caution is still very necessary. When Xia Bai lay down in his spacious and clean captain's room, all he could think about was these messy things. Before Xia Bai fell asleep, Alpha received a communication. It was from the Military Information Resource Center outside Shen City. There was a sweet sounding girl over there, saying, "Dear Mr. Xia Bai, I'm sorry. I'm bothering you so late. Mr. William from the US Department of Defense wants to speak to you. Please." Xia Bai sighed and said, "Tell him, if he wants to have a voice call with me, he will be charged 100 missiles. If he wants to have a video call with me, he will be charged 300 missiles. If he wants to talk to me face to face, he will be charged 500 missiles. I will talk to him whenever the things are shipped to my battleship." The young lady over there was stunned, but Xia Bai had already asked Alpha to end the call and said directly, "Alpha, enter captain of flying mode for me. I'm going to sleep." After a night of silence, when Xia Bai opened her eyes again the next day, warm sunlight was already shining in from the porthole of the room. Xia Bai lay beside the window in confusion and took a look. He saw below the battleship that the seawater was being stirred up and turbulent crazily, while densely packed corpses were floating above the sea level. Under the sea surface, there are countless mutants surging around. The battleship has been on fire all night, and the extreme mutants here don't seem to have decreased much. These things are simply terrifying. If these things appeared in ancient times, they would definitely destroy the entire human civilization. Xia Bai slept all night, but the battleship was always running at high speed. Although Zhang Yiden and the others boarded the ship with the intention of studying the battleship, in the end they were all real scientific researchers, and there were no people knew the seriousness and urgency of the current situation better than they did, and they started working overnight. On the other hand, although Li Guangzhi's operation progressed slowly, with Alpha's cooperation, it was completely completed in one night. Xia Bai created a large number of medical nanorobots when the battleship reached the 6th level. These little things had a chance to escape when the battleship crashed. Now they are finally put to use. The surgery performed on Li Guangzhi was quite impressive success. In fact, Xia Bai's original idea of building this thing was to use it to reverse the trend of infected survivors transforming into zombies. Unexpectedly, the first time they were used was to deal with incurable diseases in humans. However, judging from the current situation, Xia Bai seems to have little chance to test its feasibility on infected survivors who have not mutated. For Xia Bai, zombies are no longer important for the time being. If you have books, you will be long. If you don't have books, you will be short. With Xia Bai's attack on Liao Qiwei last time, no one dared to trouble Xia Bai anymore. Li Guangzhi's condition stabilized, which showed that he and Xia Bai were absolutely inseparable. The intention of cooperation directly made the situation extremely smooth. However, Zhang Yidong and his team's progress seems to be very slow. The progress of cracking the atmospheric modification system and cracking the core processing unit on the Manta Ray aircraft are almost synchronized. They have not made much progress in half a month. They can only be said to be step by step. However, what surprised Xia Bai was that another thing came to fruition in advance. Hope to support the genuine version. Chapter 374 New Information. Chapter 378 New Information. Just when Xia Bai was looking for the main valve of the atmospheric modification system, the military made a breakthrough. In advance. For the first time, the military and Xia Guang had some kind of information exchange similar to interaction. Regarding Xia Guang, the military has already started contact with it since it fell in 1999. Even after the end of the world, there are people who are specifically responsible for it and familiar with it, and the first information exchange occurred with one of the people in charge of it on researchers. A luminous structure of the glow extended out strips of faint green light, coiling around the researcher's arm. This process was like connecting some kind of information bridge. The researcher's body also became brighter, and the process began. Transmission of information. Then, the scientific researcher collapsed completely, frothing at the mouth, and was sent to rescue. Fortunately, the situation was not serious. Xia Guang had no intention of attacking or killing, but its information transmission method was difficult. Accepted by humans, and strictly speaking, this time it is not that the military has made any progress, but that it has tried to actively communicate with humans for the first time. According to behavioral experts and psychology experts, Xia Guang began to communicate with humans for the first time in the past 23 years. It was probably because of the attack of the Glacier battleship, which made this unknown creature that was roaming freely on the Earth nervous and frightened. That's why it planned to take some measures, and the only civilized existence it can seek help from seems to be humans. Therefore, proactive communication has become imperative, and after analysis and speculation, it can be determined what is clear is that Xia Guang is indeed using some weird and even unscientific means to hide its existence. Unless observed with the naked eye, it is difficult to detect it with any equipment, and its energy dissipation state is also being repaired. It can be seen that get up. It seems that the injury is recovering, but Xia Bai has no interest in any of this. In his opinion, 9 out of 10 sentences said by these experts are all based on conjecture. If they can really guess the behavior and thoughts of other alien creatures, since communication has already started, why do we need to wait until others take the initiative to talk to humans? However, even though Xia Bai thought so, he was still polite and did not show it. The scientific researcher who was closest to Xia Guang was frothing at the mouth and unconscious, but the military was not idle. They thought this might be the reason for the lack of physical fitness of the scientific researcher. The military just entered the hospital. A bunch of strong combatants from the military and even awakened ones were sent. But it is a pity that Xia Guang has no reaction to these strangers. The ray body shrinks and expands slightly, looking like a brilliant screensaver. No one can do anything with it. Xia Bai originally wanted to let Alpha come and try, because according to the speculation of some scholars, the reason why the unlucky guy who was sent to the hospital foamed at the mouth and fell into a coma was probably because his brain could not accept this level of communication. If it was a top-level artificial intelligence, systems may be able to complete information interaction. But this proposal was directly rejected by Alpha. Alpha rarely rejected the request of the Captain Xia Bai. It claimed that, if it builds an information bridge with the individual at this location, if there is a threat or virus on the other side, it is likely to infect the entire battleship. So the current situation seemed to be just waiting for the researcher who was foaming at the mouth to wake up. This wait lasted 3 days. The scientific researcher just woke up from a deep coma. For this information exchange, he could only remember a few simple keywords. D. Destroy Wiroscopians. There are no lyrics and no order, and it is difficult to connect them clearly, but from these 5 independent words, everyone can only see one meaning. Danger. Xia Bai sat in the bridge, watching the 5 words projected on the big screen, and fell into a long silence. At the same moment, the researcher regardless of his physical condition, once again plunged into the laboratory, trying to enter and interact with the shrinking Xia Guang in the screensaver. State point: this researcher is amazingly obsessed with this kind of alien creatures. After realizing that he can communicate with each other and even get information, he seems more excited than anyone else. What's strange is that Xia Guang didn't react to anyone, but when he saw this person, he once took the initiative to find out the filaments of light, trying to connect with the flesh and blood body of this scientific researcher. Xia Guang also seemed to be aware of the communication problem between himself and humans. This time he seemed very gentle, but even though it was very gentle, the unlucky researcher still couldn't resist it and fell down. He spoke again, foaming at the mouth. The situation this time was even more serious. He even had symptoms of organ failure. Li Guangji directly ordered that this guy must not have any contact with Xia Guang again until his body recovers. Although everyone is eager to get information from Xia Guang, everyone knows that if the only person who can exchange information with Xia Guang dies, no one will have a chance. This time the guy was in a coma longer, and it took a full week to wake up. This time he seemed quite weak, but the information he obtained was more complete. Xia Guang passed him a simple map, marking a scarlet red dot in the center of the entire map, claiming that it was the location of a certain weapon point, but in this information, the death, war, destruction, and escape parts of the previous 5 keywords are not involved. Only weapons are involved. This map also left people at a loss for comparison and confirmation. Some scientists even said that this might be a detailed map of the starry sky point, but it was Zhang Yidong who really figured out what this thing was. By chance, this guy made a comparison and realized that the information and location marked on this map were different from the distribution map of the atmospheric modification system they were currently digging and discovering. The degree of approximation reaches 90%. It's just that Zhang Yidong and the others use the Earth as the coordinate system to label the atmospheric modification system modules, and this map has an independent coordinate system of its own. Zhang Yidong excitedly told Xia Bai a lot, but Xia Bai only paid attention to one piece of information. The specially marked red dot is probably where the master valve they are looking for is located. That is a weapon that Xia Guang talks about. Chapter 375 Yi Hanao and Wine. Chapter 379 Yi Hanao and Wine. This breakthrough is big news for everyone. Zhang Yidong's team was making extremely slow progress, but now, with this map, he claims that he can confirm the atmosphere within 5 days, modify the location of the system's main valve point. When Xia Bai heard this, he couldn't help but let out a long breath. Yet he couldn't really be happy. Zhang Yidong only needs to consider the location of the main valve of the atmospheric modification system, but Xia Bai has more things to think about. If the information given by the researcher was correct, then according to Xia Guang's description, the thing marked on the map was some kind of weapon point. But according to Zhang Yidong, this is an atmospheric transformation system, and its purpose is to completely transform and reconstruct the entire Earth's ecosystem and environment. So, from this point of view, these two pieces of information are completely contradictory. So, why is this? Xia Bai tossed and turned because of such a problem. Still unable to fall asleep in the middle of the night, Xia Bai got up from the bed and came to the empty bridge alone. He sat down in his seat, dragged his cheeks, and looked at the dark sea outside in silence. He felt vaguely uneasy, feeling that he seemed to have overlooked something extremely important. Perhaps it was not that he had overlooked something extremely important, but that there was something extremely important that he did not know about at all. A lot of the information he got now was contradictory from a certain perspective. In fact, many things from the beginning of the end of the world were contradictory. For example, Xia Bai had thought about such a problem a long time ago. If alien creatures want to invade the Earth, why do they use zombie viruses to invade? Later, Xia Bai learned that alien creatures want to invade the Earth, but humans have nothing to do with them. The so-called global apocalypse is just the impact of the atmospheric modification system, not a superfluous attack by alien creatures on humans with exterminating weapons. They were just transforming the planet, but the human beings on the earth were affected and all of them died overnight. And now, Xia Bai is caught in such a contradiction again. Why is an atmospheric modification system called a weapon? Moreover, why does this atmosphere modification system have two technologies with different civilizations and extremely different levels of civilization? Xia Bai found that he had received more information, but was even more confused. He didn't know what the alien creatures wanted to do, nor what their purpose was in doing what they did on Earth. So there were no answers to these questions, but the only thing he knows clearly is that civilizations more advanced than humans will do things that humans cannot understand, but they should not be thankless or do contradictory and stupid things. So Xia Bai fell into a long silence. The main valve of the atmospheric modification system is about to be accurately positioned, but Xia Bai doesn't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. If we can really find the location of the master valve, perhaps we will be able to fully understand what alien creatures want to do on Earth. Right at this moment, Xia Bai heard gentle footsteps coming from behind. He turned his head slightly unexpectedly and saw a second person walking into the bridge. That's Yihan. When the girl saw Xia Bai sitting here, she was slightly stunned and instinctively shrank the things in her hands behind her. Xia Bai had sharp eyes and took a clear look at it, then said, "White wine, ha. Ha ha ha, Yi." Hanyu let out a rather embarrassing laugh. As an awakened person, this guy's drinking capacity has also increased along with genetic changes. Therefore, her drinking level has also skyrocketed. Xia Bai couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth and said, "You guy." Exactly. Yi Hanyu was embarrassed for a second or two and then let go. She took out the wine in front of Xia Bai, took a sip herself, and said, "Don't talk about me. I'm here. I'm on duty at night. The bridge cannot be empty of people but you. Why are you here so late?" Xia Bai narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "If you don't tell me, I have forgotten that there must be no one in the bridge. It was empty when I came here." Yi Hanyu sat down in his seat in the corner and said, "I'm going to find a drink. But, you, lazy captain, why are you here if you don't have a good rest?" Xia Bai said, "I'm here to see who is not doing his job properly." Yi Hanyu let out a laugh and said, "Everyone can see that you are purple with sorrow now, right? Isn't that green and purple?" Xia Bai complained helplessly. He exhaled and said, "It's nothing. It's just," he turned his head and looked at the turbulent black ocean outside the battleship and at the ferocious demon-like monsters leaping above and below the sea. He didn't know what to say. Yi Hanyu smiled and said, "I know what you are thinking." Xia Bai was stunned for a moment, then heard Yi Hanyu say, "You are worried. You are worried about whether you have made any mistakes, whether it will lead to any emissions. You are also worried about alien battleships. You are thinking about the purpose of alien creatures, and you are wondering why the atmosphere modification system is a weapon. Is the purpose of the atmosphere modification system still we want to exterminate humanity, right?" Xia Bai couldn't help but turn his head and look at Yi Hanyu behind him. Yi Hanyu took a big sip of the white drink very boldly. She drank the wine and her face had two warm blushes, which made her look a little cute. She is a carefree guy who rarely thinks, but she is very smart and can guess Xia Bai's thoughts at a glance, as if she can see everything clearly. There are two types of smart people. The first type is people who can use their intelligence in everything in life, and the second type is people like Yi Hanyu. Because she is a smart person and has no pursuits of her own, so she likes to be empty-handed. She doesn't think about anything in her head, and she looks like a careless and mindless person. But it's easy for people to overlook that she is actually a person who truly sees people's hearts. Xia Bai looked at Yi Hanyu like this and was speechless for a moment. Yi Hanyu shook the bottle of liquor in his hand and said, "What's there to think about? It's good to have a plan and know everything, but who can really be prepared for everything? There is always a solution to a problem. No one can cope with everything. Whatever can be successful, we will do it. If we can't succeed, we will bear the consequences with you." In the dimly lit bridge, Yi Hanyu raised the bottle of liquor to Xia Bai, looking bold and majestic, and very cute and lovable. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like, Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.